chance anymore. He cleared his throat. So, how was chiefing today? Can't complain, Alvin replied. Ethan nodded. Did you find out anything else about that ship Keldon saw? Nah, it sailed past the island headed south. Didn't even consider stopping, if he's right. Ethan swallowed a mouthful of stew. What was Keldon so worried about, then? I mean, I know there's not a lot of ships that sail past here, but it's not unheard of either. Alvin thought for a moment. He said the size of it was odd. Much bigger than anything else he's seen sail by. Nothing like anything else he's seen round here. Maybe it was blown off course. Apparently it was. What did he say? Far too large to be blown off any course, not headed for us intentionally. Personally, I think he's being a bit paranoid. Paranoid wasn't exactly a word Ethan would use to describe Keldon. But he trusted his father's judgment. The outcasts and their allies hadn't been threatened since the first years of Ethan's life. It seemed silly to try to make something out of nothing now, not without proper suspicions. So they fell back into silence again, growing more uncomfortable by the minute. Which is why Ethan sighed in relief when he heard a curious squawk sound from his loft. Alvin nodded approvingly. Sounds like your bird made it back. Wonder if she found new Burke. Ethan tried not to jump up too quickly. Only one way to find out, he said, setting his bowl down on his chair and bounding up the stairs. He found Orboda patiently perched on his windowsill. She squawked again when she saw him, flapping her wings as if showing off the message that was tied around her body. And much to Ethan's pride and relief, the cover had been switched out from the dyed black leather to the regular brown she was also sent with. Good girl, Bodhi, he said, scratching her head with one hand as he lifted the message off with the other. I knew you could do it. Orboda ruffled her feathers, obviously quite pleased with herself. Ethan chuckled at her and shook his head as he sat down. His desk sat directly next to the window, with the top right corner encroaching on the windowsill space. Ethan had built a small perch for Orboda and secured it to that corner of his desk. She used it often, after long flights especially, to rest in safety. Once Ethan sat down, she hopped to her perch and puffed her feathers out. She quickly settled in and closed her eyes, entirely still outside of the rhythmic swelling and deflating of her body with each breath. Ethan smiled at her as he unraveled the leather and letter. He took a deep breath and began reading. Ethan. Ha ha, very funny. After the treaty signing you followed me into the woods and saved me from accidentally running off of a cliff. Are you always going to hold that against me? You've trained Orboda impressively well. Not only did she find new Burke, but she perched outside of my house and waited patiently for me to call for her. I assume from the timing that you waited until you made it back to your island before sending her, so I think it's safe to say your training method works. I trust she won't get lost finding her way back to you. About the necklace. It was an amazing gift, and I am sorry for reacting the way I did. I guess it just surprised me. But that is no excuse. I believe you don't mean me any harm. If you did, you would have let me run right off that cliff, and I see that now. It's nice to have a friend. I haven't had many of those before. Ethan sighed heavily in relief. He hadn't burned the bridge between them. That was a good sign. She even called him a friend. But then her letter continued. But I thank Thor Orboda came when she did, because I have important news for you and your father. Shortly after you and the other guests left our island, the Wing Maiden tribe arrived in 3 stolen ships. They were attacked by an unknown threat that managed to entirely destroy their village and their island. My father offered them refuge on our island, as well as a permanent home here if they wish. We don't know much about their attackers, only that they must be looking for dragons. They are quite large in number. Atali said that they easily outnumbered the Wing Maidens. But we don't know where they came from, who they are, or what they are doing here. Please inform your father. We don't know what they know, and I'm afraid another ally could be next. Please, be careful and on high alert. I fear for your safety. Zephyr. Ethan's stomach dropped. Suddenly, the very large and unusual ship that sailed by a few days back seemed like a much more frightening omen. He let the parchment flutter to the desk as he jumped up, nearly knocking his chair over and startling Orboda as he ran for the stairs. Dad, he cried, are you sure that ship isn't a threat? Alvin looked at him with a bewildered expression as he bounded into the main room, breathing heavy. What's wrong, son? Zephyr's letter. The wing maidens, they were attacked. What? Alvin tried to stand, but ended up falling against the back of his chair when Eason moved closer to him. He tried to collect his thoughts through the pounding in his ears. He should have just brought the letter down with him. The wing maidens arrived to Newburgh after the announcement. They were on stolen ships, they had to steal the ships to escape, their island is gone, there. Son, slow down, Alvin requested. Slow down, sit next to me. Eason paused, processing his father's request, and sat in a chair beside Alvin's. He focused for a moment to get his breathing under control. Alvin reached over to squeeze his shoulder. Now, what do you mean they had to steal ships to escape? Eason tried again. Zephyr said their island was attacked, and they were outnumbered. That they stole ships and escaped the island, but their island is destroyed. They were looking for dragons, and Zephyr is afraid another ally is next. Alvin nodded slowly, taking in this information. But not quick enough for Eason's liking. Dad, that ship that sailed by. Now, don't be making any crazy suggestions like that, Alvin stopped him. We haven't seen that ship since it sailed past our island. But, Dad. Son, relax. Take a deep breath. We'll call a council meeting in the morning to decide what to do. But, Dad, what if that ship? That ship is long gone by now. It's all right. He wanted to argue again, but he saw the look in his father's eyes. His mind was made up. His eyes softened for a moment, though. You've had a hard day, son. Why don't ye turn in for the night? Get some rest so you can help me lead the meeting tomorrow. Eason looked over his father's face again, still unsure. You really think that ship wasn't a threat? Alvin smiled and patted his shoulder. I'd bet me life on it. And that this can wait until tomorrow. That I do. He looked one more time for a sign his father was lying, but he couldn't find it. He looked as sure as ever. So Eason nodded slowly in return. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll get some rest, then. Good, Alvin smiled. I think your old man might turn in early as well. Do you need any help? Nah, I'm fine. Go on, get some sleep. If only it were that easy, Eason thought. But he nodded and climbed the stairs again to his room. He pulled off his furs and draped them over the back of his chair, trying not to glance down at Zephyr's letter. But when that didn't work, he busied himself with unraveling the purple-colored leather cover, stacking it with the black-colored and plain leather covers, and tying them back up. As much as he wanted to send Orboda back with a response now, he knew she needed a few days of rest. He'd work on a letter to her tomorrow after the meeting. The meeting that he was apparently helping his father lead. Suddenly Eason felt extremely tired. He pulled his tunic over his head and threw it over his furs. Sighing, he collapsed back into his bed, too tired at first to pull the blankets over himself. But then the chill of the room became a bit too chilly, and he willed himself to slip beneath the furs of his bed. He drifted into a fitful sleep not long after. Eason woke suddenly to the sound of crashing and screaming outside. He laid still for a moment, wondering if it was a leftover sensation from a dream, and willed his heart to slow down. But the sounds kept going. What in the name of hell? He jumped out of bed and threw his clothes on as he ran down the stairs. He threw open the door as he heard Alvin struggling to get out of his own bed in the back of the hut. And he wasn't sure what he expected, but he knew he wasn't prepared for what he saw. Crazed men and women that he didn't recognize ran rampant around the village, slashing axes and swords into anything in their path, eyes wide and hair matted, smiles gleaming on their faces as they laughed maniacally. Outcasts, his people, some of the most fearless and formidable Vikings he had ever known, screaming in terror as they tried to fight back or run. And worst of all, outcasts falling in pools of their own blood all around, with far too few of the attackers falling next to them. Shit. Eason ran back into the main room, looking for his sword. Alvin's jaw dropped as he joined Eason and saw the carnage happening outside the door. Odin help us, Alvin breathed. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Dad, who the fuck are these people? Eason asked breathlessly. I've never seen anyone fight like that. They're inhuman. Alvin didn't answer. He just stared out the door. Dad. Alvin didn't move. Dad. Alvin met Ethan's eyes. And then moved more suddenly than Ethan had seen him move in years. He slammed the door shut and grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him back into the darkness of the back room and under the cover of the stairs. Ethan, I need you to listen to me, and listen closely. Find the sailing apprentices. Osmond is the oldest, you know him, right? Yeah. Ethan confirmed, very confused. Good. Find him and the rest, carefully, try not to get tangled up in a fight with any of these crazed fools, and then get anyone that you can to the northwest corner of the island. There are a couple ships docked there, load one up with whoever you can, women, children, elders, injured, I don't care. Get as many people as you can on that ship, and get out of here. Ethan's jaw dropped. What? Son, do as I say. And what are you going to be doing exactly? Buying you all some time. Ethan's heart stopped. Dad. No questions. Do as I said. Go, we don't have a lot of time. But Dad. Ethan, go, Alvin insisted. He grabbed his shoulders tightly as his eyes bored into Ethan's. You'll be okay. Sail north, go around the eastern side of Screaming Island, all right. Take the pass between there and Shivering Shores, that'll take you westward. Sail to Old Burke, Hiccup keeps a stock of emergency supplies there in the Great Hall, you remember where that is, yeah? Ethan's eyes stung with tears. Dad. Alvin sighed as if he was holding back tears himself. I know I'm asking a lot of you, son. But you can do this. You've got your mother's hug with ye. And I need you to preserve as much of this tribe and you can. They'll follow you. I know they will. And then Alvin crushed Ethan to his chest, catching Ethan off guard. Make me proud, son. And then Alvin was shoving Ethan's sword into his hands and pushing him out the back door, dragging him along until they found Osmond, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him back into the shadows, ordering him to follow Ethan's lead, and running off. And just like that, his father was gone. Ethan, what's going on? His father was running off to his death. Ethan. Ethan turned to Osmond. His father was asking him to preserve his tribe. Something clicked in Ethan's head. Maybe he was just repeating what his father said to him earlier. Maybe he really did have some instinct deep down to lead. But whatever it was, he wasn't about to question it. We're escaping with whoever we can. When you see the other sailing apprentices, tell them the same. Grab anyone you can, women, children, injured, elders, anyone who's still alive, it doesn't matter. Load everyone onto one ship in the northeastern boatyard. We push off as soon as we can, so don't take long. Osmond nodded and ran off without another word. And Ethan took off in the opposite direction. He felt numb. He just threw around orders as he came across people. He grabbed children and pushed them into the arms of any nearby outcast that was able to carry them and sent them off. Many of the men caught wind of what they were doing and distracted the crazed Vikings so they could get away. Everything just fell into place, and yet the whole island was going up in flames at the same time. Everything was perfect, but everything could not have been worse. He scooped up two little girls, both probably about 5 years old, and ran back into the shadows just like he had done over and over through the night. Breathing heavy, he tried to shush them and calm them and tell them everything was okay despite everything in his brain screaming at him that none of this is okay. He looked around and found a man who looked to be a few years older than Ethan hiding behind a nearby building, looking just as frightened as Ethan felt as he occasionally peeked around the corner. He'd have to do. All right, girls, you're going to have to trust me, okay? Stay quiet so the mean people don't find us, got it? The girls both nodded and silenced themselves. Ethan took their hands and pulled them along, sneaking back into the trees. Thankfully, this end of the village was quiet, albeit unsettling from the bodies littered across the ground. But it was much easier to jump from hideout to hideout than it had been near the village center where the bulk of the fighting was. As they closed the distance to the man, Ethan picked up a stone and threw it his direction to catch his attention. He spun and locked fearful eyes with Ethan, who waved him over. But the man didn't move. Ethan tried again, but the man still didn't move. Ethan groaned and then turned to the girls, nudging them behind a bush. "Stay here, don't move." They knelt down as Ethan turned back to the man, glancing around to check for enemies before joining him. He stiffened as Ethan fell against the building he was hiding behind. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. The man sputtered, "What? I'm Ethan, son of Chief Alvin, but I'm sure you know that already. But I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. What's your name?" He hoped spelling everything out for the poor guy would give his head a chance to catch up. The man blinked, but after a pause, said, "Me. I'm. I am Harver." Ethan nodded, slowly catching his breath. Gods, this guy was not prepared to fight. Although, neither was Ethan. "Nice to meet you, Harver. I need your help." "My help?" "Yep, your help. I've got two scared little girls hiding back in the trees. I need you to carry one and follow me. There's a group of more outcasts waiting on a ship in the northwest shipyard, they'll be safe there. And so will you." Harver looked paler than the moon. Outcasts. Thor Almighty, he must really be in shock, Ethan thought. Well, we wouldn't want to invite the enemy, now would we? And no, sir. All right, so can you help me? The man looked back to the trees, over towards the village, and then back to Ethan before nodding. Great, then let's go. He grabbed Harver's arm and ran into the trees after glancing at their surroundings for enemies. He wasted no time picking up one of the girls and handing her to Harver before scooping up the second girl and holding her to his chest. "Stay close, we gotta move." Harver nodded and mirrored Ethan's hold on the girl. And then they ran as hard as they could through the forest. "I think this is the best we're going to get Osmond grimaced." Ethan scanned the new inhabitants of the ship. Most of them were young children, women Ethan's age and slightly older, and elders. And as much as he wanted to gather more of his tribe, he knew they couldn't stay much longer. Every moment still spent on the island was a greater chance they would be captured, and all of their effort would have been for nothing. But he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that maybe he could save more. More specifically, maybe he could save his father. "Get ready to push off," Ethan ordered. "I'll be right back." Without waiting for confirmation, Ethan turned on his heels and ran, ignoring Osmond calling after him in confusion. "Please let him still be alive, let him be alive, Odin, please let him be alive." Ethan burst through the trees without thinking, but instantly dug his heels into the ground. He fell backwards and scrambled back into the shadow of a building as his heart stopped. A terrifyingly large dark-haired man stood over his father, who was being forced to kneel by two more sneering men. The dark-haired man was in rough shape, one sleeve of his tunic was torn off, revealing a maze of scratches and scars and streaks still glistening with fresh blood. His hair was tied back and he had a cloth bandage wrapped around his head. The white was soaked through with dark red and seemed sunken into his head where Ethan assumed his left eye used to be. He gripped the wood of a bow in his left hand, and when he moved Ethan could see the feathers of arrows peeking above his shoulder from a quiver on his back. Outcasts and attackers alike shied away from the man, which only made Ethan fear him more. His own people refused to stand any closer to him than they had to. All but the two men holding his father at his knees, and two additional men that flanked the leader's right and left sides. He spoke with a deep, scratchy voice that sent chills down Ethan's spine. So the man sneered, "Are you the infamous Dragon King?" Ethan had to physically stop himself from vomiting. Dragon King. He was looking for dragons. They had to be the same tribe that attacked the Wing Maidens. Alvin had to realize that as well. Alvin was quiet for a moment, but with his back to Ethan, he couldn't see what his face looked like. And then Alvin began to laugh. Ethan saw the man's mouth twitch, but he composed himself. "Dragon King." Alvin laughed. "You're looking for the Dragon King. Son, I don't know who fed you that old legend, but no Dragon King walks these lands." The man didn't move. He simply stared at Alvin with the same sickening smile. Until he slowly reached behind his head and painstakingly slipped an arrow from the quiver. Ethan's attention was distracted for a moment when he noticed all of the attackers nearby cower as their leader nonchalantly notched the arrow in his bow. Not once did the man blink, not once did his body move outside of his arms, and not once did his eyes leave Alvin. He lowered his head slightly and smiled wider. Quite unfortunate that I believe you're lying to me. And I suggest you stop that immediately. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears as he strained to hear his father's reply. Alvin laughed again and sighed. I can't say I blame ye, you're not the first poor soul to come looking for a ghost. Dragons used to fly freely here, but they were hunted to extinction decades ago. Maybe your Dragon King retired in Valhalla, eh? Dad, what are you doing? Stop provoking him. The man smiled wider. Oh, now, that's not true. I know for a fact my tribe stumbled upon some of those flying beasts just a few weeks back. The man pulled back slightly on the arrow. Which means that now I know you're lying. It took all of Ethan's strength to keep his legs stable beneath him. The wing maidens. The razor whips. Alvin shrugged. Think what ye will. I ain't seen a dragon with me own eyes, so I say they're gone. The man's shoulders bounced once in a humorless chuckle. And then he fully pulled back his arrow and shot Alvin in the leg at close range. Alvin cried out, and Ethan lunged forward. But just before he managed to leave the shadow of the hut, two strong arms wrapped around his chest and pulled him back. No, 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 this can't be happening, this can't be. Sir, no, you can't let him see ye, a voice whispered in his ear. He barely recognized it belonging to the outcast he didn't recall from earlier. It's not worth ye being caught too. Ethan continued to struggle. That's my father. He can't. He can, and he will, Sir Harver begged. He's a madman. And ye have a ship full of people waiting for ye. Of children and women and defenseless injured folks that need a leader. Sir, you are that leader. I beg ye, be smart about this. The madman stepped closer to Alvin and spit, change your mind yet, old man. Ethan's blood boiled with rage. He threw off the boy's arms and spun around to face him. What, so I just let him torture my own goddamned father? Harver looked pained. Your people need ye, sir, he choked. This is your last chance, the madman yelled, making Ethan spin back around. He looked angry now, and Ethan wondered what it was his father said to him. Whatever it was, the madman suddenly had another arrow notched and pulled back. If you're hiding something, then your people must know it, too. Speak, or let your tribe suffer the consequences. Alvin slowly lowered and shook his head. Ethan could barely see him chuckle. No. No, Dad, don't. Alvin spit on the man's boots. Try me, Scrager Songsarin. The entire island stilled to unsettling silence. Ethan didn't do well with conflict. Ethan's heart stopped when the madman's eye lit with a rage unlike anything he had seen before. It was something he had always struggled with. He let the arrow fly from his fingers without a twitch of regret, the snap of the string making Ethan nauseous. Most people on Outcast Island knew this, especially Alvin. The arrow struck Alvin directly through his heart, cleanly slicing out of his back. Blood seeped from the wound and he gasped in pain. He froze like that, looking up to the sky as the men holding him down quickly stepped back. Alvin had always done everything in his power to protect Ethan. As if the arrow wasn't enough, the madman unsheathed his sword and cleanly severed Alvin's head from his shoulders in one fluid motion. It fell to the ground with a sickening thud. Ethan choked on air and fell to the ground. His vision blurred, his ears suddenly felt stuffed with wool. The village square before him grew smaller and smaller as darkness engulfed him. Ethan didn't do well with conflict. Snap. The arrow left the string. Thwick. The arrowhead pierced his father's chest. Off. Alvin gasped his final breath. Shhhhh. The sword left its sheath. Thud. Alvin's head hit the ground. It just kept repeating, running circles in Ethan's head. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Snap. Thwick. Sir. Sir. Harver's voice drifted in through the haze, but he sounded so far away. Sir, we have to move. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Sir, I beg ye. Ye have to give me a hand here. Ethan didn't do well with conflict. Come on, sir, move your feet, one step at a time, please. Alvin had always done everything in his power to protect Ethan. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Thwick. Ethan snapped to attention when an arrowhead sunk into a tree trunk near his head. A bird screeched above him, and he looked up to see stark white feathers circling against the darkness of the sky. To his left stood Harver wide-eyed and breathing heavy, staring back in the direction they must have come from. He met Ethan's eyes. Sir. We have to go, Ethan choked. He grabbed Harver's wrist and pulled him along as Orboda broke her circle above them, guiding them towards the northwestern edge of the island where the boat was waiting for them. They pushed themselves until their lungs burned and their feet ached, and then pushed themselves harder, until they finally broke through the trees. Push off. Ethan screamed at the ship. Osmond, push off. Osmond looked back at him like he had 3 heads. Osmond, now. Osmond hesitated for a moment longer, and Ethan was about to scream at him again when he jumped into action and urged the rest of the sailing apprentices to the same. The ship slowly started drifting off from the island as Ethan and Harver reached the dock. Harver, jump. Harver didn't hesitate to follow his orders, he immediately jumped towards the ship, just managing to get his arms over the side so he could cling to the wood. Ethan followed suit, ignoring the instant pain in his hands and the pulling in his arms when he grasped the lip of the wood. Osmond and a number of other apprentices hurriedly reached over to pull the 2 up on the deck. Sail northeast. Ethan cried, his voice strained from the effort of running and pulling himself up. Around Screaming Island. And then sail due west in the pass between Screaming Island and Shivering Shores. Ethan, what happened? Osmond asked as he helped him to his feet. The question echoed in his head. Ethan, what happened? Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Alvin had always done everything in his power to protect Ethan. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Ethan's stomach turned. He couldn't do this, he couldn't handle the infinite sets of eyes staring at him, looking to him for leadership and solace and hope. It was something he always struggled with, and something he knew he would have to overcome eventually. But he couldn't right now. Northeast, then west between Screaming Island and Shivering Shores, Ethan repeated. And then we sail directly to Old Burke. He couldn't bring himself to say any more than that. He couldn't bring himself to look anyone in the eye. All he could do was trudge to the captain's quarters, his father's quarters, and shut the door. And even when the darkness engulfed him, he couldn't bring himself to do anything more than sink to the floor and lie in a numb heap. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. The bravest, strongest warrior Ethan knew, gone. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. The only family Ethan had ever had. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. His father, the man who raised him, the man who believed in him. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Thud. Snap. Thwick. Off. Shhhhh. Snap, thwick. Ethan didn't do well with conflict. It was something he always struggled with, and something he knew he would have to overcome eventually. Most people on Outcast Island knew this, especially Alvin. It was the reason his father had torn the village to shreds over spreading rumors and criticizing Ethan's place in the village during a meeting when Ethan was 12. Alvin had always done everything in his power to protect Ethan. Ethan knew it was how his father showed his love. Notes. Don't hate me, see y'all in 2 weeks. And for those of you who would like to scream at me or cry with each other, I started a Discord server for my beaters and I to collaborate. But if there is interest, I'm thinking about opening it up for readers to chat as well. Feel free to comment if this is something you'd like to participate in, and I will reply with a link to join if we go ahead and open the server. Chapter 15, Putting Things into Perspective. Notes. Hello my beautiful readers. I am back. I cannot apologize enough for my sudden disappearance. It wasn't at all planned, but due to some unexpectedly severe side effects I got when I started a new medication, it was unavoidable. If anyone wants more information, I did post an update on my Tumblr page, but it was quite a long post, so I won't duplicate it here. Long story short, I am not planning any more absences, but if any are needed I will hopefully be able to warn in advance, and you can expect updates to continue every other Friday as normal. I have also opened my Discord server to readers, link to join down at the bottom of the chapter and in my bio, if anyone wants to join for a more direct way to get updates in case anything else unexpected does come up. Enjoy the second longest chapter I've written for this story thus far. Happy Smiley. ********************************* TW, Panic Attack, Self-Harm ******************* Chapter Text. Zephyr breathed in deep through her nose and exhaled slowly through pursed lips. She kept her eyes focused on her opponent ahead of her. She gripped her axe handle tighter, feeling the resistance of her new leather gloves against the leather-bound wood as she wrung her hands around it. Her left foot planted in the ground just ahead of her as her right foot shifted back, poised on the ball of her foot. Keep your weight on your front foot if you want to defend, back foot to attack. Front to defend, back to attack. She saw the twitch of her opponent's sword just before he lunged. She moved to parry an attack from the right, but she gravely miscalculated, a fact she realized only when the blade of the sword sailed between their bodies and froze just before contacting her left arm. Not only that, but she realized immediately that she shifted her weight improperly. It was front foot to attack, and back foot to defend. A statement her father had drilled into her head for hours, and she still flipped it. Zephyr groaned and dropped her arms, breaking her stance. "It's all right, Zeph, try again. You can do it." Zephyr looked over her father's stance again, trying to focus her attention on the movement of his feet. She was breathing heavy and sweat soaked her hair to her forehead. She gripped her axe handle tighter as she noticed Hiccup lift his heel off the ground. He lunged and swung his sword across his body, which Zephyr parried with her axe handle and stepped back. Her face lit up instantly as the metal of his sword made contact with the wood. Yes. She did it. She actually did it. Unfortunately, Hiccup lodged his sword under her axe head and managed to pull it right out of her hands, sending her axe flying across the sparring ring. Zephyr groaned angrily. "That was great form," Hiccup praised. "You just have to make sure you don't forget to hold on to your weapon tightly. You let your grip slack when you—" "I get it, Dad," she interrupted, a little harsher than she planned. Hiccup pursed his lips and studied her face. "It's not going to come to you overnight, sweetheart," he reminded her. "I didn't say I thought it would," she snapped. "Zephyr. Can we be done for today?" Hiccup looked her up and down. Zephyr didn't care much to try to figure out what he was thinking. She could feel the frustrations of the last few hours rolling over her in waves, the next more uncontrollable than the last. She had to get away before she broke. He sighed. "All right." Zephyr didn't wait another moment. She instantly turned on her heels and ran for the trees, sweeping up her axe where it lay next to the rest of the weapons her father had brought with them that afternoon. She expertly lodged it into its holder on her back, just about the only thing she did expertly with her axe at all today, and bolted into the trees, deciding to take the long way around the village so she wouldn't run into anyone. And she didn't stop running until she began climbing up to her hideaway. All afternoon she spent sparring with her father. They ate lunch early so they would have plenty of time to practice. The sun had all but disappeared now beneath the waters. Half of the day spent sparring. And not once was she able to get the upper hand. Not once did she manage to push back. Not once did she even successfully parry his attacks. She threw her bag down on the ground, not even paying attention to where it went. She picked up a rock and threw it through the waterfall with all her might. She couldn't do this. She couldn't fight, she couldn't lead, she couldn't even hold on to her own damn axe. She was supposed to be a chief, to replace her father and lead not only her tribe but probably the wing maidens too at this point, and she couldn't even hold a damn weapon. With a direct threat to their allies and probably even New Burke itself on the loose. She spun around and kicked the rock walls around her, punched them until her knuckles were blooded, heaved larger rocks over her shoulder and launched them at the walls. What was she thinking? Why did she think she was capable enough to handle any of this? Why didn't she listen? Why didn't she just listen to all the people who doubted her? It would have made all of this so much easier. She screamed and threw another large rock at the wall, making the wall crack at a point that stuck out further than the rest of the wall and sent stones scattering along the cavern floor. She picked up the stones and threw them into the waterfall, letting her cries escape with them. What was she supposed to do now? Learn. How could she sit around and learn like nothing was happening? One of their allies had already been decimated, so much so that their entire way of life was gone forever, any trace of their culture burnt beyond recognition, seeking solace on her island. And what could she do for them? Nothing. She heaved another large rock over her shoulders and screamed as she sent it flying through the cascading water. And then she dropped to her knees. She bowed her head, barely catching her upper body on her hands, and watched as tears poured from her face and darkened the floor beneath her. She heard the rock she had thrown clatter down the side of the waterfall, fading into the distance until she registered the faint splash at the bottom of the ravine. She couldn't do it. She wasn't ready. Her chest heaved with each cry, her body shook so badly she couldn't focus her eyes. She wasn't ready. She shakily pushed herself back until she fell against the wall. You're not ready. She pulled her knees to her chest, covered her face with her arms, and buried her hands in her hair. You're not ready for this. What were you thinking? Did you actually think you'd have what it takes to replace your father? The tamer of dragons, the one who forged peace between two civilizations that spent hundreds of years at war with each other. And you thought you could fill his boots? Stop, no, stop, she begged. You'll never be good enough. You've disappointed him. You did it once when the wing maidens arrived and you disobeyed him. And you did it again with today's ungodly pathetic sparring, if it could be called that. You've disappointed him. Stop. Stop it. She gripped her hair so hard that she wasn't sure if she had pulled any out. She wouldn't have been surprised if she had. Useless. You're useless. You'll never live up to his expectations. You'll never impress your tribe. You'll never be enough. Stop it, she screamed, falling onto her side and curling into a tight ball. What would Ethan think? She gasped as she tried to catch her breath, clawing at her face and her hair and her eyes and her arms and the ground, anything to help her feel a little more stable. But of all the thoughts running through her head, strangely, the last one kept coming back. What would Ethan think? Tilda. Zephyr wasn't sure how long she laid on the cool floor of the cave. All she knew was she laid there until she felt numb and the darkness enveloped her. Her eyes slid across the floor and paused on her bag. She reached out involuntarily and slipped her hand under the flap, feeling around until she found leather. Wrapping the leather strap around her fingers, she pulled the necklace from her bag and held the stone to her chest. Her mind was finally quiet, too exhausted to even think a single word. Well, except for one word. Ethan. She wasn't sure why that one word had consumed her thoughts in the last week. She had thought the word occasionally since the treaty signing, but it had forged itself an ever-present home in her thoughts lately. Maybe it was simply the gift she now clutched to her chest. Yes, that made sense. She simply had a reminder of that word always in her bag, always at her hip. And when she felt unsafe or sad or scared, she held the gift, just as she did now. But why did she do that? Since the announcement, she had noticed two questions constantly racing through her mind. When she was thinking about her expected role in her tribe, can she do that? When she found herself clutching the gift again, why did she do that? She still didn't have an answer to the first question. And maybe she never would, as terrifying as that possibility was to her. So she found herself analyzing the second question more closely, because it seemed to be the easier of the two to answer. And she wasn't sure how she felt about the answer she had come up with. For years now she had noticed times where she would slowly lose control. And she didn't like losing control, so she would simply ignore it. But the older she grew, the more difficult that feeling was to ignore. It made her feel vulnerable and weak and childish. It made her inadequate. It made her feel unfit to lead. And if others saw her lose control, they would begin to think the same. At first, she didn't lose control often. At first, it was little things that would get to her, and she would push them down and try to overcome them. But sometimes they would fight back, especially when she was scared or stressed or distracted. It always hit her worst when she was distracted. And the worst times? The worst times were when she broke, like tonight. The first time she didn't even really realize it happened. Not until much later, not until she broke again a few more times. But she still remembered the first time she broke badly. Zephyr had just turned 10 a.m. month earlier, and her parents had told her and her brothers they had another sibling on the way not long after her birthday. She was supposed to be in bed, but she was cold. It was late, and the house was still and quiet, so she assumed everyone was already in bed. She only went down the stairs to grab an extra blanket from the fire pit room. But her parents were there, and they were talking in whispers. So Zephyr peeked around the corner, wondering what they were talking about. Her mother's face was red and she was shaking as she sat on the couch. Her father looked scared where he sat across from her. Astrid, we talked about this, Hiccup begged. That was 3 years ago, Hiccup, she cried quietly back. And that time was different. I didn't have any problems with Spro was easy. I've been so sick I can't stand on my own. It happens, love. Not usually. Just with nothing. Ast, please, you're going to make yourself sick again. Mommy had been sick a lot lately. That's the problem, Hiccup. Tears started to flow down Mommy's face. I was never sick like this with Zephyr. She came out perfect, right on time. I was sick like this with nothing. He came early, and he got sick, and he almost died. I was never sick like this with Spro. He came out perfect, and right on time. That doesn't mean anything. Daddy stopped her and laid his hand on Mommy's belly. It just means you're sick. That's all. That's fixable. Mommy cried and shook her head. I don't, she trailed off and bit her lip, crying harder. Daddy scooted closer to her and pulled her into his chest. He hugged her shoulders tight and rubbed her tummy. What is it? Asked. Mommy laid her head on his chest like a pillow. I don't. I can't leave you alone with them. Daddy was quiet for a moment, but then he started to cry, too. You won't. I can't leave them. You won't. Mommy shook her head. I love them so much. I know you do. Mommy looked up into Daddy's eyes. I love you so much. Daddy and Mommy both started crying harder. I love you so much, he whispered. I can't do that to you, Mommy sobbed. You won't. Hiccup. No, Ast. You won't. You won't leave, Daddy pleaded. You've been through worse and you were just fine. This won't be any different. You're just a little sick. Mommy looked up into Daddy's eyes. She touched his cheek softly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't, he whispered back, wiping tears off her cheek. She did the same to Daddy. But I did. Daddy shook his head and pulled Mommy close. No, you didn't. You're just scared. And that's okay. He kissed her head. Zephyr had completely forgotten about her blanket hunt after that. She ran back up the stairs as quietly as she could, slipped back into her room, shut the door behind her, and buried herself in her furs. She didn't see her mom frightened very often, and at that point in her life she was especially not used to it. If Mommy was scared, then Zephyr was terrified, because nothing scared Mommy. Zephyr remembered how much more it scared her when she couldn't stop shaking. She remembered how, even then, she knew she was vulnerable like that. How long it had taken her to stop the tears, how much longer it had taken to catch her breath. She doubted she would ever be able to forget the heart-wrenching, gut-crushing, overwhelmingly soul-breaking fear she had felt. Her chest had hurt so bad she had thought she was dying. Part of her was shocked she had woken up the next morning, because she remembered as she drifted off to sleep she had thought dying would have been better than enduring whatever had consumed her. But she could never bring herself to tell her father about the incident. Or her mother. Or even Tough Nut, for that matter. Because she didn't want to relive it. More importantly, because she didn't want to disappoint anyone. Now, she just felt she was being dramatic, thinking she was dying that first time. But maybe that was just because it had happened so many times since then. But while thinking over the few interactions she had with Ethan, she realized that no one had seen her in that state. Except for him. Not only that, but it had happened on the same day they had met for the first time. And normally, that would scare the shit out of her, knowing he knew anything about a deep dark secret of hers. But he didn't hold it over her. He didn't try to use it against her. Even when she was breaking, he didn't try to take advantage of her. He tried to help her. He wanted to make sure she was okay. He wanted to keep her safe. He stayed with her until he was convinced she was better. He wanted to be her friend. It wasn't enough she felt connected to him already because he knew such an intimate detail about her that no one else did, but the fact that he was so gentle and caring and protective with her made her want to explore that connection even more. She shivered, suddenly realizing how cold the nights had become. And laying on a bed of wet rock certainly wasn't helping the chill nor the numbness in her limbs. Still, she struggled to find her arms and push herself up. Even when she finally did, she felt any last bit of energy left in her was gone. She shivered violently, which seemed to give her just enough energy to move to the back of the cave and wrap her furs around her. But then her head rolled back against the rock and she seriously considered sleeping in the cave for the night. She sighed. No, if she did that, her parents would definitely notice. Especially after she ran from sparring with her father so quickly. But she was so exhausted. But was she exhausted enough to sleep in the cave and risk her parents hounding her until she had to confess why she disappeared? Groaning, she kicked a rock hard enough that it clattered across the floor and through the vine-draped entrance, clicking occasionally as it fell down the cliffside. Damn it, she said. She wanted to scream the word, but a normal speaking volume was all she could muster. She clutched her necklace tighter, holding it against her heart as her head rolled back again. I hope you're doing better than me right now, Ethan. She fell quiet and still after that. If she listened closely, she could make out the sounds of the nighttime animals rustling through the foliage below under the noisy rushing waters. The rustling wasn't as loud as it usually was in the warmer months, but she was so used to hearing it that it was second nature. It was calming to her. It felt safe. It was familiar. In fact, she was so content and calm listening to the sounds of the island that her soul left her body for a moment when a scooping, high-pitched screech blasted into her solace in a mess of white feathers. She tried to focus her eyes as she caught her breath and calmed her heart. It still took her a minute to process the white wings, expectant stare, and leather wrappings that she found before her. Orboda. The Geoforcan chirped and stepped impatiently closer. Zephyr sat up as Orboda practically walked into her lap. What are you doing back, girl? You just left 2 days ago. She scratched her head as she looked her over. It didn't look like she was hurt. You didn't get lost, did you? But then Zephyr realized the brown leather had been replaced by the black. Odd. It had taken a week before she returned last time. Orboda nipped at her finger and squawked. Ow. All right, all right. She shook her head as she tied the necklace around her neck and slipped the letter off of Orboda. Give me a second for Thor's sake. The first thing she noticed as she pulled out the letter was that it seemed to be written on the back of a torn map. As she unrolled it, she could feel it was oddly coarse, like it had been wet at some point and then dried, but only in splotches across the parchment. The ink was a little smudged in those places as well. When she flipped it over, she hesitated for a moment at the messy, scrawled characters on the page that didn't at all resemble the elegant script of Ethan's hand. It took her some time to make out the bones of his script beneath the scribbles she saw in front of her to realize that, yes, Ethan did in fact write this letter. It only took her a moment to extrapolate those findings, and yet by the time she read the first sentence, her stomach had already dropped to her feet. Dearest Zephyr. I wish I had better news. But I don't really know what to say, so I guess I'll just get right to it. We have been attacked. My tribe was ambushed late in the night. I was able to escape with a handful of tribe members, but mostly the vulnerable who were unable to fight. Many are injured and we are short on supplies. There was no warning, we were entirely unprepared. It was out of sheer luck my dad had a few boats on the backside of the island we were able to escape on. My dad. Zephyr, I don't know what to do. The madman who attacked us, When we first heard the screaming, my dad ordered me to round up who I could and direct them to the northeastern edge of the island, to board a boat that was there, and be prepared to set off with whoever I could save. I did, but as I came back to see if there was anyone else I could help, that madman had my father held at his knees in front of him with an arrow aimed to his heart. Zephyr, he demanded to know where the dragons went. He kept calling my father the Dragon King. He demanded my father stop lying when he denied knowing of dragons. He thought my father was your father. He must have thought our island was New Berk. My dad refused to say a word. He kept denying everything. He even started provoking him. And then the madman was infuriated and he keep his eyesight. I have all that is left of my tribe on this boat with me. I'm all they have left. And I don't even know what to do. We're sailing towards Old Berk. I don't know where else to go, but I know that your dad keeps emergency supplies there. That's what Dad told me. He told me to take them there. It's the best idea I have right now. But I don't know how long we can last. I had to let you know. I'm afraid for you and your family. This man is. I don't even know how to explain it. But if he finds out that Outcast Island isn't New Berk like he thought, he will start hunting for you. I'm sure of it. Please, Zephyr, be cautious. Warn your father. I can't let this happen to you too. Eason. Zephyr's heart stopped. She touched the necklace Eason had gifted her, now resting over her broken heart. She looked at Orboda, looking tired and a little disheveled. And then she ran like hell for the second time that evening. Only this time the tears fell before she even had the chance to start running. No one was home. The forge was cold and empty. The village was quiet. No one was in sight. Which meant it was taking too damn long to find her father. She was heaving and sweating and shivering and crying, but she couldn't stop. She had to find Dad. She had to. Because he would know what to do, right? Right. So she was currently sprinting to the last place she could think he would be. She knew council was meeting tonight, and that Hiccup had extended the same offer as always to her, with the added bonus of granting permission to give her input and vote. Zephyr was convinced she had missed the meeting. They never ran this late. But where else could they be? And sure enough, when she tore through the practically empty great hall directly for the council room and burst through the door, she found all of council, her parents, and Atali staring back at her. But she didn't care. She looked directly at the head of the table. "Daddy," she choked. Hiccup instantly stood and ran to her. "Zephyr. Sweetheart, what happened?" Astrid followed behind as closely as she could but wasn't able to stand quite as quickly as Hiccup. Zephyr realized she was gasping for air between the exertion of running all over the island and the sobs tearing through her chest. I. "Zephyr, hey, breathe, baby girl," Hiccup begged, grabbing her shoulders and leaning down to look her in the eye. "It's okay, you're safe. Just breathe." Zephyr shook her head, coughing now as she tried to force words through the sobs. No, he. Hiccup looked like he was about to cry right along with Zephyr. He straightened and pulled her against his chest, one hand in her hair and one secured around her back. "Please, baby girl, please breathe. Just relax. Relax." Astrid ran up next to them, and Zephyr felt another gentle hand on her shoulder. "Zephyr, baby, is it this?" she asked gently. Zephyr heard the parchment of the letter crinkle, still trapped in the tight vice of her fingers. Zephyr nodded into Hiccup's chest. She felt her mother's fingers slide comfortingly over the skin of the back of her hand as her own fingers slowly loosened. Once she was able, without tearing the parchment, Astrid gently freed the letter. She kept her hand on Zephyr's shoulder as Zephyr assumed she was scanning over the shaky words. Hiccup hugged Zephyr tightly and kissed her hair, but Zephyr could hear his heart pounding under her ear. After a moment, Astrid gasped. "Hiccup," she breathed. "You need to read this." Zephyr couldn't see anyone's expression as Hiccup hesitantly let her go, only for Astrid to wrap her up in her own arms and gently guide her towards an empty seat at the table. Astrid sat to her right, scooting her chair closer so she could keep her arms around Zephyr. Someone sat to her left, Snotlout. It was Snotlout, she could tell by his boots, and squeezed her shoulder. She could just make out the quiet tapping of her father's footsteps returning to the head of the table, at a slower pace than usual with occasional hesitations, telling Zephyr he was reading the letter as he walked. "Hiccup, what is it?" Snotlout asked. Hiccup stayed quiet for a little longer as an uneasy silence fell over the room. But when he finally did speak, his voice was thick and low. "Scratch everything we planned for this coming week," he began. Zephyr's heart skipped a beat, but quickly returned to a pounding gallop. She glanced up but otherwise didn't move. "Son, what happened?" Valka sternly prodded. Hiccup took a breath, but then turned to Zephyr instead of answering. "Zeph, you don't have to stay if you don't want to," he quietly assured. Zephyr only responded by wrapping her arms tighter around her mother. Hiccup took a deep breath and slowly nodded. "All right." He turned back to address the full room. This is a letter from Eason." He locked eyes with Atali. "Seems like your tribe wasn't an isolated incident." Atali's face paled whiter than fresh snow. Everyone else in the room followed suit as the news sunk in. No one spoke for a long stretch of time, and Hiccup didn't seem to know how to continue. "How bad was it?" Roughnut quietly asked. Hiccup swallowed. "Mass casualties," was all he managed to whisper back. No one moved. No one spoke. For a moment, Zephyr wondered if everyone was still breathing. Her now quiet and sporadic gasps were the only sound. After a while, once she had caught her breath and her face had dried, she couldn't stand the silence. They needed to act, they had to start forming a plan. Eason needed help. He was scared and hurting and alone, and Zephyr would be damned if she didn't even try to change that. She looked to her father, and she was about to ask him to continue. But she caught a heartbreaking look in his eyes. One she didn't see often because he wouldn't let anyone see it when he could get away with it. She could understand if he couldn't continue leading the meeting while he was thinking about Grandpa Stoic. But someone had to do it. So Zephyr decided to shove down her sorrow and put on her big girl boots. For her father. And for Eason. She took a deep breath and held tight to her necklace. "He didn't write much," she quietly began. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed her father jump in surprise, and bewildered eyes all around the room turned to her. She ignored them and continued. "I think he's still trying to process what happened. It sounded like they are still making their way away from the island, so the attack must have been within the last few days. According to his letter, they were ambushed late in the night, and were taken by surprise. They were vastly unprepared and most of the tribe didn't survive. It sounds like having dragons was a huge advantage for your tribe," Atali, she added, surprising herself, but she didn't take time to dwell on her observation. Though her voice broke when she started again, she pushed herself to keep going. "Alvin ordered Eason to gather whatever outcasts he could and direct them to the northern end of the island where they had a few boats. He said it's mostly vulnerable people, so I assume elderly or children. But they all fit on a single boat, and that's all that is left of the tribe." She swallowed, urging herself to continue. He said he had gone back to see if there was anyone else he could collect before they pushed off. He saw the attacking chief. He called him a madman. He had Alvin at arrow point and was calling him Dragon King, demanding he reveal the location of the dragons. Alvin denied everything and began provoking the attacking chief. And when he didn't comply, he killed Alvin, Hiccup whispered. Zephyr suppressed a sigh, a little glad she didn't have to say the words herself. She nodded in agreement. "That's what it sounds like by Eason's letter," she quietly added. "He said he's all the remaining outcasts have left. So I assume Keldon also did not survive." "Which means," Astrid trailed off and looked at Hiccup. "The outcasts have a new chief," Hiccup finished for her. The room fell silent again. Alvin had told Eason to sail to Old Burke. "That's where they are headed now," Zephyr finished. After a pause, Roughnut asked, "So what do we do now?" Grandpappy Gobber scoffed incredulously. "Well, we have to go help him," he yelled. Well, his voice was a normal volume, but after the silence and quiet words it sounded very loud. He softened as he turned to Hiccup. "The boy's only 17. I agree the boy needs assistance, but this enemy is obviously a direct threat to us as well. Iret voiced. Is it wise to split our numbers like that? Probably not, but do we really have a choice? Tough Nut argued. We're sending aid to Old Burke, there's no question about that, Hiccup stated. And we're bringing the outcasts here. Zephyr hadn't realized she had sat up and stiffened until she relaxed back into her chair at her father's words. The question is, he continued, how do we split up? Iret will be sailing, of course, as our sailmaster. Iret nodded his head. Tough Nut, it sounds like they'll need healing attention. How do things look here? Tough Nut thought carefully before he spoke. How bad do you think it is for them? Hiccup grimaced and glanced back down at Eason's letter. He scanned over the scribbled words and read aloud a few phrases. I was able to escape with a handful of tribe members, but mostly the vulnerable who were unable to fight. Many are injured, and we are short on supplies. We're sailing towards Old Burke. I don't know where else to go, but I know that your dad keeps emergency supplies there. But I don't know how long we can last. He didn't give specifics, but I imagine it's not good. Tough Nut nodded slowly, staring at the table and leaning his pursed lips on his folded hands, elbows propped up in front of him where he sat. Tough? Rough Nut asked. He put up a single finger, still staring off. Rough Nut looked to Hiccup and shrugged. Hiccup was about to move on, but then Tough Nut finally spoke. For the most part, the wing maidens are fine. Minden is the only one I'm still worried about, but she's getting better each day. And she's stable. If Rough Nut can focus on her, then I think I should go to New Burke with 3 of the 5 apprentices. That leaves 2 here to help Rough Nut with anything else that comes up. We don't know what we're walking into, so I'd rather be over-prepared, especially if they have a mostly vulnerable population. They may end up with more injuries or sickness by the time they get to Old Burke. He lifted his head and met Hiccup's eyes. At least, that's my suggestion, Chief. Hiccup nodded his head. I trust your judgment. Go get whatever supplies you need together and sort out your apprentices. We'll send Rough Nut if we need anything else from you. I want a ship on that water as soon as possible. Tough Nut nodded and ran down the opening in the back of the room that acted as a back exit of the Great Hall without hesitation. Hiccup scrubbed his face with his left hand and continued. So that leaves Rough Nut here on the island. Astrid is staying too, obviously. Astrid sighed sarcastically and rolled her eyes. Left out of the fun again, she joked, winking at Hiccup. Hiccup half smiled in return and relaxed a bit, but not much. So that leaves me, Lout, and Legs. He doesn't include Grammy Valka or Grandpappy Gobber because of their ages and their roles as direct advisors to him and the rest of council, Zephyr thought to herself, followed quickly by a string of curses also directed at herself. They were talking about a plan to save Eason and the outcasts. Was this really the best time to be playing apprentice of the chief? Well, actually, yeah, this was probably a perfect time to be. Her internal debate was interrupted when Hiccup's eyes flickered to Zephyr. Do you want a roll? He asked slowly. Zephyr instantly nodded. Hiccup nodded back a little less enthusiastically. Okay, so me, Lout, Legs, and Zeph. He pursed his lips, thinking hard. Legs, I really would like to have you go to help ration supplies. Take some of ours, of course, but also give the outcasts, well, Eason, some guidance on how to ration what they have. So, Hiccup pursed his lips again. Then it's probably best to send Snotlout and Zephyr and I'll stay here. Zephyr's heart pounded in her chest. Send Snotlout and Zephyr. She was going to go to Old Burke. She'll get to see Eason, make sure he's okay in only days rather than weeks. She could be there for him, support him, help him. But then another thought occurred to her. Wait, she said, ignoring the twinge in her stomach when all eyes turned to her again. She focused on her dad. Wait, Dad, you need to go. You should go to Old Burke. Hiccup blinked. Sweetheart, he started slowly, that only leaves your mom and Rough Nut here. No, Dad, you have to go. No one will be able to help Eason like you could. No one else understands what he's going through. You'd be the most help to him. She was practically pleading him by the last sentence. She could see the pain fill Hiccup's eyes, and she grew hopeful that he saw her point. But her heart fell when he started to speak again. Zephyr. That's a really nice thought, but I still can't. I'll stay, Snotlout said. Zephyr flipped her head around and found him eyeing her curiously. He blinked and turned to Hiccup instead. I'll stay so you can go. Hiccup hesitated. But that just leaves you with Ruff and Astrid. If something happens, Astrid can't fight. Hold on, Hick, you were just about to leave yourself on this island with just Ruff and Astrid, Snotlout interjected. What's the difference? Hiccup stuttered. The difference, Valka offered, crossing her arms and narrowing her eyes at her son, is that he would be putting himself in danger rather than you, Snotlout. Hiccup sighed in frustration. Astrid snorted. I'll stay. Zephyr hadn't realized she had said the words until Hiccup looked at her. He looked conflicted. Zeph. No, Zephyr stopped him. If I stay, then that's an extra person to help on the island. I know this island inside and out, so I'd be of better use here anyway. She wasn't entirely sure where all of this was coming from, but this wasn't the time to stop and wonder. That way you can go to Old Burke. Where you would be of better use. Nope, too far, that was too far, that was way. How do you suppose? Grandpappy Gobber asked, his shit-eating grin giving away how much he was enjoying putting Zephyr on the spot. She didn't even have time to think before her brain took over again. Because Dad gets it. Eason just watched his dad die, and now he suddenly has to figure out how to lead his tribe, which is in shambles now. Which, as I recall from my history lessons with Uncle Fishy, Dad has some experience with. However, unlike Dad, Eason's mother isn't there, and neither is Keldon. Meaning he has literally no one to advise him, not anyone that he would trust at least. She pushed on despite the pounding of her heart and the flushing of her face, not able to stop the words from pouring out of her mouth. On top of that, let's consider the fact that he probably didn't have a chance to even mourn his father. He is alone, and hurting, and completely unprepared, and he's stuck on a ship with people who suddenly have no one else to turn to but a guy that half of the tribe didn't trust from day one. He has the support of all of us, sure, but he has to keep the peace in his own tribe, and we have no idea what we're walking into, what kind of state their tribe is in right now. He needs Dad. Zephyr finally stopped and met her father's eyes. She fizzled out enough that all she managed to add was a quiet, "He needs you, Dad. Please. He needs you." Hiccup was stunned to silence for a moment. Apparently, everyone else was too. Even Gobber's face had sombered. And all eyes turned to Hiccup. He shook himself back to reality. Ah. Okay, well, then I'd need an acting chief. Snotlout, would you be able to handle that on top of Astrid's duties? Do we need an acting chief? Snotlout asked. I mean, you're not dead yet. You're just not on the island. With the Wing Maiden tribe here and the news of another ally under attack, I think it's best in case something happens before we get back. I'd rather have my intentions of clear leadership in place so no one can argue against it later. Just until I get back to the island. Snotlout considered, but just as he opened his mouth, he saw Zephyr out of the corner of his eye. And she saw the spark of an idea. Uh-oh. Don't do it, don't do it, don't. You know what, probably not. Why don't you just assign Zephyr acting chief? Zephyr's jaw dropped before she quickly snapped it shut. She knew it was coming. She had a guess of what his idea was before it left his mouth. But her jaw still fell open either way. Snotlout stifled a smile. Hiccup wasn't amused. Snot. No, Hiccup, I'm serious, he pushed. You've already named her heir. When Stoic was hurt back when we were still on the edge, who did the council choose as acting chief? You. And you weren't even on the island. You weren't even in the archipelago. That's different. Hiccup argued. I was 17, and the only child of the chief. She's only 14, she was just announced there not even 2 weeks ago, the tribe is still adjusting to the idea. I can't in good conscience leave. I can do it. Zephyr yelled, but she wasn't sure if it was out of frustration that her father didn't trust her or sheer desperation to make sure he went to Old Burke. Hiccup wilted. I don't doubt that, sweetheart. I know you can. I have every bit of faith in you that you would be a great chief. What I don't have faith in is the rest of the tribe. Then let me prove it to them. This is the perfect chance, while you're still around and I have Snotlout helping me, in the most controlled environment we could ever hope for. I can do this, Dad. And you have to go. She felt tears stinging her eyes, but she didn't care. Please, you have to go. Eason needs you. Hiccup looked pained as he searched Zephyr's eyes. He sighed quietly to himself, and then cleared his throat. All those in favor of Zephyr's role as acting chief in my absence. His eyes never left her as a chorus of, I rang out around the room. All those against, he choked. Zephyr could have sworn she would have been able to hear a feather drop. Hiccup swallowed and nodded. Acting chief it is. Chapter 16, Zephyr wishes she had studied better for this test. Notes. Hello my lovely readers. We're a little late this week because exams had to take priority the last 2 weeks again. But hopefully I'll be able to catch up again in the next 2 weeks. Also quick reminder that I have opened up my Discord server with my betas to readers as well, and we already have a couple readers that have joined. Invite link will be posted at the end of the last chapter. Enjoy. Chapter text. Zephyr was a little overwhelmed. But she couldn't show it. She was chief now. Well, acting chief. But the only difference was that the title wasn't permanent. Well. She prayed to the gods it wasn't, at least. The minute the words, acting chief it is left her father's lips, things picked up in a flurry of activity rather quickly. Fishlegs was off to take detailed inventory of the island's supplies. Hiccup and Irette began an in-depth discussion on the ideal number of ships and crewmen to prepare. Rough Nut ran to find Tough Nut in order to catch him up on the rest of the meeting he missed and help him finish his own inventory. Snotlout and Astrid hounded Atali for more detailed information regarding the enemy chief and his tribe in order to determine what kind of attack they needed to prepare for, if any, while Zephyr watched. And it seems like only moments later they were all back in the same room, spouting off all of the determinations they each individually made of their assigned duties. Instant adjustments were made, points were argued, options were debated, round and round in circles until everyone agreed on the action plan. It felt like the planning took all night, but in reality it lasted only a few hours. Eventually they all agreed, if a bit hesitantly, that Hiccup and Irette would command 2 ships with minimal crew in order to maximize the amount of space for supplies and eventually outcasts refugees. 1 ship would have been preferred by Irette, as it would have made them more maneuverable in case they ran into the enemy, but ultimately it was decided they simply couldn't fit everything on 1 ship. They hoped the massive size of the enemy ship, according to Atali's recollection, would give them the advantage. If Zephyr was being honest, the thought of crossing paths with the enemy ships never occurred to her. And then everyone was gone again, packing up supplies and gathering a crew. The sun was nowhere near rising before the village was buzzing with activity, preparing ships with an unknown destination as far as they knew. Zephyr tried to help where she could, but she found herself gravitating home at some point, floating up the stairs and stopping at her parents' bedroom door like a child that just had a nightmare. Hiccup didn't notice at first, hurriedly throwing things he needed into a bag. But eventually he caught sight of her out of the corner of his eye. He focused his attention on her and seemed to grow worried. Zephyr, is everything okay? Zephyr hugged her midsection tighter. Wait, when had she started doing that? And took a shaky breath. Do you really think there's a chance you'll run into that tribe? Hiccup's face wilted. He dropped the spare leg he was packing on the bed and waved her over as he crossed the room himself. Zephyr cursed her eyes when she felt the sting of tears, but couldn't help herself as she obliged, letting him crush her against his chest for the 2nd time that night. It's just a precaution, sweetheart. It's just something we need to prepare for. Yeah, in case it happens, she choked. Hiccup didn't really have an answer to that, apparently. He hugged her tighter. We'll get him home, Zeph. Zephyr bit her lip. You mean you will get him home? She lifted her head to look him in the eyes. She saw the pain she felt mirrored in them. Right, Dad. She could see his heart break in his eyes, which just made Zephyr feel worse. You're going to make it home, right, Daddy? She asked, feeling sudden panic rise in her chest. Oh, Zeph. Yes, of course I'm going to make it home. He pulled her back into a tight embrace, rocking side to side and combing his finger through her hair. His voice was quiet and thick with tears. Of course I will. I'm not going to leave you like that. Not if I have anything to say about it. Promise. He was quiet. Dad, promise. Zephyr insisted. He hesitated a moment, but finally gave in. I promise, he whispered. But it didn't make Zephyr feel any better. She knew why he hesitated. Because no matter what he did, no matter how hard he fought, no matter how careful he was, some things were out of his control. There was always that risk to any sea voyage. And it was late in the season. Ships never left Newburgh after Zephyr's birthday. Not unless it was absolutely necessary. It just had never been necessary before. Not that Zephyr could remember. As much as she wanted Ethan here so she knew he was safe, and with as much she was trying to give her father the cold shoulder for the way he spoke to her back when the wing maidens first arrived. She couldn't deny that she was terrified something terrible was going to happen. And she didn't want to lose her dad like Ethan did. She didn't want to lose her dad at all. Something about that thought made the reality of the situation sink in. The very real threat that something could happen and she could lose her father forever, that all of this would be for naught and she'd be left to lead a village with no one to guide her, that she'd be stuck in the same situation her father and now Ethan had found themselves in, all of it crashed over her. The thought that this could be the last time she would speak to her father crept into her mind. This could be the last time she saw him. This could be the last time he held her in his arms and told her everything was going to be okay. This could be the last chance she had. She couldn't stop her face from puckering slightly as tears escaped from her eyes again. Daddy, I'm sorry, she struggled to whisper. Sorry. He gently pushed her back to look her in the eye. Sweetheart, what are you talking about? She felt like her chest was about to burst as more tears fell. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I just wanted to impress you. He breathed out like someone hit him in the stomach. I just wanted to show you I could do it, she continued. Zeph. But I should have listened and not questioned you because I know you were just trying to protect me and... Zephyr, honey. And I could have learned so much more if I did, but I just... Sweetheart, hey, come here, shush. He brushed her bangs from her face and guided her to the end of the bed, sitting her down next to him. I looked sternly into her eyes. I need you to understand something, and I want you to listen very closely, all right? She nodded her head, prepared for another lecture. But he reached out and gently cupped her cheek in his hand, smiling softly. You impress me every day, sweetheart, without fail. Just the fact that you're interested and motivated to learn anything and everything about my job, the job that I fully intend to give to you someday, is enough to impress me. When I was your age, it was the last thing I wanted for myself. It was the last thing I wanted when I didn't have a choice but to take over. I still wonder if it's the right job for me at times. He chuckled sadly at himself, and then shook his head slowly, still smiling. But you wake up every morning ready for whatever challenge the day will bring, whether you feel like you are or not. You soak up every bit of information you can that you think will help you be a better chief for your people. And that, Zephyr, is what separates a good chief from a great one. Not the diplomacy, or the ability to fight, or being able to command the attention of a group of angry Vikings. Caring for your people is the key. And, sweetheart, you've shown me your passion for this tribe from the first day I perched you on my shoulders and took you chiefing with me. She chuckled and sniffed. He smiled and caught a tear from her eye with his thumb before softly continuing. There has never been a doubt in my mind that you would be the best successor I could ever ask for, and I thank the gods every day for that. Because I don't think your grandpappy Stoic ever had that thought. He chuckled, his voice growing husky as his eyes brimmed with tears. And while I will do everything in my power to make sure we get back to Newburgh safely, you and I both know things can happen that we can't control. He opened his mouth to continue, paused, swallowed hard, and pushed on. Which is why I need you to understand. Zephyr, I am so proud of you. I have always been so incredibly proud of you. And that will never change. And God's forbid if something does happen to me out there, I know this tribe will survive under your lead. I have every faith in you. I always have. Because you have spent your life doing what you can to better this tribe. And that is what defines a great chief. He unnecessarily brushed her hair from her face again as his tears brimmed over. I love you so much. I wouldn't ask any of this of you if I didn't fully believe you could do it. And I'm not saying it'll be easy, but that's why you have me and your mother, Grammy Valka, Grandpappy Gobber, all of council. We all have your back. And if something happens to me, they will continue to have your back. Use them. That's what they're there for. She nodded, trying to focus on her father's face through the blurry veil of tears. But I won't have to worry about that, right? Because you'll come home. I promise, I'll do everything I can to make that happen. He smiled sadly. But even if I don't, it's going to be okay. Zephyr wasn't sure what to say anymore. She was too overwhelmed with the thought of losing her father. He kissed her forehead and hugged her tightly. I love you, sweetheart. I love you too, Daddy, she replied into his chest. Suddenly, Mom walked into the room. Honey, I found your is everything okay? Dad and Zephyr jumped at the new voice, but then turned to each other and chuckled. Yeah, we're all right, Dad said, wiping his eyes. Zephyr did the same as he turned back to Mom. Oh, yes, my extra furs. Thanks, asked. She nodded and set the furs on the bed behind Zephyr and started rubbing her back. The ships are almost ready. They're looking for you, she told him quietly. Dad nodded. We should probably get going then. Zephyr felt like crying again. Dad must have seen it in her face. He stood and pulled her up with him. It's okay, little warrior. It's just a week. She nodded and quietly repeated, just a week. He sighed and pulled Zephyr and Mom both into a hug, kissing Mom and then Zephyr on the head. Zephyr leaned against her father and wrapped her arms around him. Mom wrapped one arm around Zephyr, one arm around Hiccup's waist, and laid her head on his shoulder. And when Mom squeezed Zephyr's shoulders, Zephyr felt the small bump of the baby in Mom's belly press against her. And she couldn't help reprimanding herself a little bit. She had to be strong, she had to be a leader and accept the situation as it was. She had to be able to push aside the emotions so she could think clearly and do what needed to be done. Because Dad was counting on her to keep the village safe and running smoothly so he could save their allies. Well then, it was time to shove all those feelings down. Dad sighed. All right, we need to get going. I don't want to make Ethan wait any longer than he has to for backup. Zephyr and Mom both nodded, and Zephyr felt so empty when he pulled his arms away. But she had to be strong. So she helped her parents gather the rest of Dad's belongings and carry them down the stairs. Grammy Valka was waiting in the main room, holding a sleepy Willow and talking to Spro and Nuffink. They all turned as Zephyr and her parents came down the stairs. Nuffink and Spro instantly ran over to Dad. He dropped his bag and kneeled down to better hug his sons. Please be careful, Zephyr heard Nuffink say. I will, Dad replied. Daddy, do you really have to go again? Spro asked. Just for a little bit. Ethan needs help. Can't somebody else go help him? Spro complained. Dad chuckled sadly. No, Uncle Tuffy and I need to go. Spro sighed and hugged Dad tighter, squeezing his eyes shut. Okay. Dad kissed their heads and squeezed them both one more time before letting them go and standing up. Spro walked to Mom and wrapped his arms around her waist instead. Nuffink hugged Zephyr as they all watched Dad. He reached his arms out to Willow. Come here, baby girl, give me a hug. Daddy has to go on a boat for a little bit. Willow scrubbed her eyes with her fist, but leaned towards Dad and let him lift her from Grammy's arms. I know you're sleepy, baby girl, Dad said, hugging her tight and kissing her hair. Phew, Daddy, Willow yawned. I love you too, sweetheart, he said, looking to Grammy and freeing an arm. Grammy hugged him tightly around Willow. Will you help us with the kids while I'm gone? Of course, she promised. Dad nodded and pulled away. He squeezed Willow one last time before handing her back to Grammy. Turning to his sons, he said, behave for Grammy and Mom, all right? Nuffink and Spro both nodded silently. And listen to Zephyr, 2. She's taking my place while I'm gone, so she's in charge. Nothing's eyes widened. Wait, really? Dad nodded carefully and narrowed his eyes. Yes. So don't make her job any harder than it's already going to be, understood? Nothing raised his hands in surrender. I was just gonna say that's really cool. Dad looked Nothing up and down in warning one last time. All right. Try to get some sleep, okay? I should be back in a week. Nothing and Spro nodded. Dad nodded back and picked up his bag again. Zeph asked, mind walking me to the docks? Mom and Zephyr nodded and picked up the belongings they had carried down the stairs as well. Dad said a final goodbye to Nothing, Spro, Willow, and Grammy, and they walked out the door. The walk to the docks was quiet. The village was alive with activity, but still eerily quiet in the darkness of the night. Vikings eyed their chief, his wife, and his successor carefully as they walked across the island, wondering what could have possibly happened to warrant the sudden voyage across the archipelago. Zephyr was impressed they complied so easily. They'll settle down once they know what's going on, Dad muttered. Maybe we should hold off so I can properly address the tribe. I can handle it, Dad, Zephyr insisted. He glanced worriedly at her for a brief moment. Are you sure? Positive. I'll help her with it, Mom offered. I'm sure Snotlout would be happy to help too. Dad sighed and turned back to Zephyr. I hate asking you to do that. Zephyr was about to argue that she could handle it, but then he added, I really thought I'd be here to watch you address the tribe for the first time. Zephyr smiled to herself. Dad chuckled mischievously. And to see Spitaloot seething with anger the whole time. Zephyr giggled. They were all quiet again until Dad cleared his throat. Just don't let them run all over you, all right? You officially have my permission to do whatever you have to do to get them to take you seriously, he added with a chuckle. Zephyr smiled at him as he continued. Stay strong, but don't be afraid to admit if you don't know something or if you were wrong. If they accuse you of being wrong when you know you aren't, stand up for yourself. Don't ever take no for an answer unless it's the answer you're looking for. But more than anything, he glanced down to make sure she was listening. Don't let them change you. You're a good leader, you can handle this. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Zephyr nodded her head. Think you can remember all that? Dad joked. Zephyr smiled. I think I got it all. By now they had found their way to the docks, and the ships were ready to go below them. Dad sighed and pulled Zephyr in for one last hug. Good luck. Zephyr returned the embrace, squeezing him tightly as if that would somehow keep him safe while he was away. You too. As he let Zephyr go, he turned to Mom. He cradled her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. She wrapped her fingers around one of his wrists as her other hand locked onto the base of his neck behind his head. Their lips broke apart after a moment, but they continued to embrace each other as they rested their foreheads on one another with closed eyes. Be careful, he whispered. She nodded and replied, you too. He opened his eyes and let one of his hands fall, resting gently on the bump in her stomach. Extremely careful, he pleaded. She met his gaze. I will, I promise. He stepped away unwillingly as she reached out with her hand, holding his hand until the space between them overtook their reach, and met Irette on the platform with the rest of the crew. He turned to Snotlout and nodded for him to lower them down to the ships. Zephyr hugged her mother as they watched the pulley system slowly drop the platform, waving to her father one last time as he disappeared below the edge of the cliff. And suddenly Zephyr really needed some space. She cleared her throat. I'm going to go clear my head for a bit. Mom looked worriedly at her. Are you okay? Yeah, I need to process all of this for a minute. Mom nodded her head slowly. All right. Just don't go far. I won't. I'm just going to take a quick walk around the village and then I'll come straight home. Hey, Grandpappy, it's me again. Zephyr looked up to the stone face of her late grandfather, trying to imagine the soft smile and kind eyes her grandmother always described. She sighed, fighting back tears. I know that I never knew you. Dad said you passed about 5 years before I came along. But he and Grammy tell me all the time that they see glimpses of you in me. She laughed half-heartedly. And those are big shoes to fill. She started slowly pacing her way around the base of her grandfather's statue, taking in the various scenes depicted around it. I've heard stories. All of these, yeah, but lots of others, too. Stories about you and the way you ruled Old Burke. The way you lead our people. Grammy tells me all the time about how you were a kind and gentle ruler before she was taken. Stern when you needed to be, but you held such respect from your people that you seldom needed to. She stopped in front of the depiction of stoic diving to save Toothless from drowning, just before the Red Death was defeated. She kneeled on the ground, sitting back on her feet and reaching out to graze her fingers along the carved image of her grandfather. Most of Dad's stories are about you being a hardened heart leader, she continued, voice soft. He says he never understood what you went through, how it must have felt, until he was older and stopped focusing on trying to impress you all the time. She smiled a little. Well, after he did impress you in a way no one expected. Not even him. She stood back up for a moment, shifting her focus to the next image over, stoic on the back of Skull Crusher. He said those next 5 years were the happiest he'd ever remembered seeing you. He told me how he'd never forget the pride in your eyes every time you looked at him. She gracefully fell to her knees again. How he wishes he hadn't pushed so hard. He blames himself for what happened. He says he doesn't, but I know it's just because Grammy and Mom and I tell him not to. She chuckled to herself. He's as stubborn as us all. Maybe worse. A strong gust of wind blew through the clearing, lifting Zephyr's braid from her back for a moment and gently pushing her to the side. She smiled and looked up, preferring to think it was her grandfather speaking to her from Valhalla. All right, far worse. Her gaze fell back to the image in front of her. She lifted her fingers to trace the lines in the stone again, following the outline of the dragon first and then that of her grandfather as she remembered what brought her here in the first place. Dad likes to tell me all the stories of his mistakes. And your mistakes. He says those are most important. He says he wants me to know that it's okay to make those mistakes, because that's how you learn. She paused, her hand falling down to her lap. I feel like it's different for me. You were the idyllic image of the stereotypical Viking, so of course you demanded respect with ease. The biggest challenges you faced were your own, those in your head or the struggles close to your heart. And then there's Dad, who was a hot mess. The complete opposite of you in every way. Smaller and scrawnier and clumsier, with absolutely no regard for his own safety, desperate to prove himself to a village that never believed in him. But he won their respect by eliminating the threat of dragon raids and uniting dragons and humans as allies, as friends. She smiled, eyes fixed on her hands laying in her lap. I'm so proud to be his daughter. To hear of the things he's done and the way the tribe respects him now. Like he's finally proven himself enough that not a single person in this tribe would dare question his decisions. And then there's me, Zephyr sighed, pulling herself to her feet and pacing in front of her grandfather. The firstborn of the chief, yes, but also his daughter. A girl. No woman has ever led a tribe on her own before. Even if the daughter inherited the chiefdom, it was ruled by her husband, not her. I checked. I researched. I tore through every single book, every record, every manuscript that Dad and Uncle Fishlegs have. Never has a chief's daughter grown to take the throne, and yet Dad expects me to. She took a deep breath, rubbing her temples. Okay, well, not expects, necessarily. He wouldn't think any less of me if I handed the throne down to Nuffin, but Nuff doesn't want it. He's too carefree and wild for it, he doesn't want to be tied down like that. And that's fine. I don't envy him for that. I love this tribe and its people and I want to lead them and care for them. I don't know if I can. What if they don't respect me? What if they never see me as a leader the way they saw you, the way they see Dad? I know what they say about me, Grandpappy, I hear them. They think I'm just some naive little girl who has never seen conflict in her life, and who would never have the proper knowledge to lead them into battle if need be, or ration properly through a famine, or protect them through a harsh winter, or, she sighed, hands falling to her side in defeat. We live in a peaceful time. They're right, I've been alive for 14 years and I haven't seen struggle or conflict. Which I'm happy about, for the tribe's sake, but how am I ever going to earn their respect? Because Dad ordered them to respect me. Mom threatened them to. My aunt and uncles scold them for speaking badly of me. That's not what I want. And now I have to go and address this entire village, who have absolutely no respect for me, and tell them that my father left me as acting chief while he goes to save half an island's worth of people descended from those banished and casted out of our own tribe from a madman that only attacked them because he believed those outcasts to be us, and somehow convinced them to follow the orders I'm giving to prepare for full-out war that I have no experience with, because my people would rather have my pregnant, emotionally unstable, axe-wielding mother lead them through this. Zephyr collapsed on the ground, breathing ragged as she tried to pull herself together again. But I can't tell him that because he does believe in me, she continued, voice barely reaching above a pained whisper. And how can I tell him no? How can I? How? How can I destroy that trust? How can I admit to him that I don't believe in myself enough to do this? Not because he'll be disappointed in me, oh gods no. He would tell me that it's okay, he understands, he's not upset with me, it's a hard job and he would never force that on my shoulders. But that's almost worse. She sniffed as tears broke through, rolling down her cheek as she looked up into the face of Stoic the Vast, chuckling at herself. I wish you were here, Grandpappy. Dad's amazing, and he means well. But sometimes I feel like he's too afraid that he's putting me through what he went through, throwing me onto the throne when I'm too young and clueless and unprepared, that he'd just pull me back into his arms and handle everything himself to save me from it. I want to show him that I can do it, I don't know how. She sniffed. I wish you were here. So I could talk to you instead of burdening Dad with that. I feel like I don't have anyone else to turn to. Well, that's a big ol' pile of yak, a voice said, startling her back to reality. Zephyr jerked around to find Snotlout emerge from the trees, quickly turning away from him again to scrub the tears from her face. She sniffed hard again and managed to choke out, "Excuse you, I'm kind of having a private conversation here with my grandfather," as she gestured to the statue looming over them both. Snotlout looked up smiling as he approached and bowed. "My apologies, Chief, but I would like to request an immediate counsel with your granddaughter on an urgent matter." Zephyr sniffed again and wiped her nose on her sleeve. "What's so urgent?" When he didn't say anything, she looked up to find his hand reaching out to her. She took it and let him lift her up to her feet. He let her wipe the dirt off of her leggings before pulling her into a gentle embrace, one arm securing her against him around her back and the other softly cradling her head to his chest. "Just came to see if you were all right, Zephy." She took a deep breath, struggling to keep her composure. "Thanks, Louty. You know you can always come to me, right?" He looked up to the face of his former chief. "I'm no Stoic, and I'm definitely no Hiccup. But I've got ears." Zephyr felt the tears prick at her eyes again. She wasn't sure what to say. So instead she nodded into his chest, ignoring the pain in her face as the rough fabric of his tunic scrubbed against the raw skin of her cheeks. Gods, she had cried so much tonight. Louty sighed. "Though I do need to tell you that I don't think the tribe is going to be patient enough to wait until the morning to figure out what's going on." Zephyr's chest squeezed. She grimaced and met Snotlout's eyes. "Does that mean I have to address them now?" "Don't be silly," he said, ruffling her hair. "I'm sure they'll wait a minute or two before they start romping angrily through the town." She knew he was trying to make her laugh and lighten the mood, but she was too terrified to play along. He simmered when she didn't react. "Hey, it's okay. We'll talk over what you'll say before we go, all right? You can do this. Me and your mom will be right next to you the whole time." She swallowed hard against the lump in her throat, begging the bile to stay in her stomach. She nodded shakily and tried to take a deep breath as she clutched the gem of her necklace still tied around her neck. She could do this. For Dad. For Eason. Chapter 17, Stepping Up. Notes. Hello my lovely readers. I know it has been a while and I sincerely apologize for that. The last semester kind of drained me mentally, so writing took me a bit to get back to. But I'm so excited to share this next chapter with y'all. I will leave an announcement about a change in my update schedule at the end of the chapter, but since I made y'all wait long enough, enjoy. Happy Smiley. ****TW, discussion of traumatic events, aftermath of battle ****. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Zephyr, one day after the siege of Outcast Island. As Zephyr strolled back into the village center with her uncle at her side, she tried to wrap her head around what she was about to do. Not necessarily any part of it in particular, she would have been happy if she had been able to make any part of it sound even remotely normal. Sadly, that didn't happen. She was distracted for a moment when Snotlout veered off the path to the Great Hall. But when she looked up at him curiously, all he said was, "Your mom has something for you back at home first." Zephyr didn't bother to question more after that as her mind began racing again. She mindlessly followed him through the door of her home and obeyed his order as he gestured up the stairs. She found her mother fussing about in her parents' room, and quietly cleared her throat. "Mom. Louty said you needed me." Mom stood up and turned, sighing in relief. "Zeph, there you are. How are you doing?" Zephyr shrugged. "Okay, I guess." Astrid gave her a pitying smile and waved her over. As Zephyr crossed the room, her mother wrapped her arms around her yet again. "You can do this," she said. "Dad and I believe in you with all of our hearts." Zephyr tried to nod her head, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. So she just silently wrapped her arms around her mother instead. After a moment, she whispered, "I'm nervous." Mom chuckled. "I'd be worried if you weren't. Your father was too the first time he addressed the tribe," she said. She combed her fingers through her daughter's hair and continued, "Just remember to acknowledge their concerns. Tell the truth. Sometimes, that's all you can do. They may not like what they hear, but they'll respect you more for it later on." Zephyr huffed. "Sure, but how do I get them to respect me now?" Mom hummed as she thought. "Well, don't let them decide when they are ready to listen." Zephyr's brows pinched together. "How do I do that?" Mom shrugged. "Don't give them a choice. Be tougher than you feel like you are. Be meaner than you ever believed you could be." As Zephyr started to think over what that advice meant, her mom crossed the room back to a large wooden chest against the wall. "Your dad wanted to be the one to give this to you, but we decided before he left that we wanted you to have it now." And since he didn't have a chance to do it himself, after rummaging through the chest for a moment, she stood and held up what looked like a black fur blanket. She smiled softly and held it out. "He asked me to do the honors." She let the furs fall open, and Zephyr gasped. It wasn't a blanket. It was a fur cloak. And it nearly reached the floor, like her father's did. It had two fasteners adorned with the same pendant her announcement gown had, which Zephyr assumed would fit nicely into her usual armor. Just like her father's did. Her chieftain's furs. Zephyr's jaw fell open as she reached for something to say, but she couldn't stop staring at the beautiful black furs. Mom smiled and held them out. "Well, go on. Are you going to stand there and gawk, or are you going to try them on?" Zephyr couldn't help but smile as she stepped forward and grazed her hand through the fur. It had been carefully cleaned to an incredible softness, obviously yet to be worn or used for anything else. Awaiting the day to be gifted to its owner. An owner who wasn't quite sure if she deserved it yet. Her mother turned her towards the reflecting glass as she threw the furs over her shoulders. Neither of them spoke as Mom carefully secured the fasteners in place and stepped back. And yet when Zephyr looked into the glass, she didn't see a chieftain. She saw a frightened girl playing dress-up in her father's clothes. Just like she felt when she put on her formal gown before her announcement. "Dad didn't think it felt right the first time he put his on either," Mom said quietly from behind her. "And that's okay. You'll grow into it just like your father did." Zephyr seemed to make up her mind about her earlier musings. "I don't deserve this." "You do," her mother replied confidently. "You just don't see it yet. But you will." Zephyr nodded absent-mindedly, but not exactly to agree with her mother's words. She reached up to free the fastener from her armor when her mother stopped her. "Wear it tonight. To keep a piece of Dad with you and to reinforce your role with the tribe." That's why we wanted you to have it now. Zephyr nodded again as the words sank in. It's time to go then, isn't it? She asked hesitantly. Mom smiled understandingly and nodded. I think so, little warrior. Zephyr felt a lump in her throat at Dad's nickname for her. Mom guided her out the bedroom door and down the stairs, where Snotlout was waiting. He smiled at them. Looking good, Zephyr. Zephyr smiled weakly. Her mind was elsewhere at the moment. Like wondering how her tribe would take the news. Especially with the news coming from her. Wondering how she was going to demand their respect and attention. How she would look to them, a 14-year-old girl with their lives quite literally in her hands. Wondering what in Thor's name she had gotten herself into. Wondering if Ethan was alright. Deciding this was happening far too fast for her. And then they were shrouded in the darkness of the back tunnel entrance to the Great Hall, and it felt like only a moment later they were standing in the council room walking around the table they had all gathered at only hours before and stepping up to the door to the main hall, and Zephyr realized. She took her place in front of the door. Zephyr realized the time for wondering was over. No turning back now. Zephyr took a deep breath and shook out her shoulders as she straightened up. She felt her mother step up to her right side, as she always did with her husband, and Snotlout step around her left side and up to the door. He placed his hand on the wood and turned back. Ready? He asked Zephyr. Zephyr shakily chuckled. As I'll ever be. He smiled reassuringly to her. We'll be right beside you the whole time, he said. And we believe in you. As if to confirm she agreed, Mom placed her hand over Zephyr's right shoulder and squeezed gently. Zephyr laid her right hand over her mother's and nodded. Let's go, she said as confidently as she could muster. Snotlout smiled. Aye, Chief. Zephyr felt a shiver race down her spine. Mom squeezed her shoulder again. Snotlout took a deep breath himself and pushed the door open. Zephyr and Mom paused for a moment to let him take the lead inside. The bickering of the tribe swelled and avalanched through the doorway as Snotlout stepped in and bellowed, "Quiet for your acting, Chief." Everyone quieted for a moment as Zephyr and Mom stepped through the door, and Zephyr knew they were focused on General Haddock. But then speculation began rolling over the crowd as people started pointing out Zephyr was wearing new furs that seemed similarly designed to her father's. They all watched closely as Astrid Haddock and her daughter stepped up to the council table. And then went silent as Astrid Haddock sat directly to the right of the chieftain's chair. And then erupted when her daughter took her place directly in front of it. Zephyr could feel herself shaking uncontrollably in her boots. She looked back to Mom, who did her best to encourage her with a smile that said, "It's okay. You can do this." Zephyr nodded back, swallowed, and took a deep breath. Looking out over the crowd of angry Vikings, completely ignoring her as she stood before them, she willed herself not to back down. She could do this, she could do this. She closed her eyes and balled her hands into fists. Yes, she could do this. She had the backing and faith of the entire council, the people she grew to know as her aunts and uncles from the moment she was born, a bond stronger than any born of blood alone. Her grandmother believed in her. Her mother believed in her. Uncle Snotlout believed in her so much he had fought to give her this chance. And her father believed in her enough to leave the village to her in a time of distress. She could still hear the words he had said to her as if he were here now, speaking them to her. "Zephyr, I am so proud of you. I have always been so incredibly proud of you. And that will never change. And God's forbid if something does happen to me out there, I know this tribe will survive under your lead. I have every faith in you. You're a good leader, you can handle this. Don't let them convince you otherwise." She could handle this. She was a chiefess to be. And she had a people to protect. She took a deep breath again, trying to take advantage of the fleeting confidence from her internal pep talk while she had it. But by the time she tried to speak, all that came out was a breathless, "Okay." No one paid her any mind, continuing to argue about why the chief had left without notice and left his teenage daughter in charge. She cleared her throat. "All right, everyone, let's just." Not a single head turned. Zephyr huffed and tried again, a little louder, her growing agitation seeping into her tone. "Excuse me." A few heads turned directly below her, but no one stopped talking. Zephyr growled. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught the movement of Snotlout stepping up directly beside her, hands balled into fists as he sucked in a deep breath. But Zephyr raised her arm, stopping him with a touch of the back of her hand to his chest. He paused and let the air out of his lungs in a huff of confusion, but stepped back. She puffed out her chest and lifted her chin, letting her hand drop in a fist back to her side as the anger and frustration and exhaustion from the last day into the night really began to set in. Fine then. If they wouldn't give her their respect on her own, then she'd demand it. In one swift motion, she stomped her feet on her father's. Would that make it hers for the moment? Never mind, that wasn't important right now. Chair, followed by the long table in front of her as her hand reached back to grab the handle of her axe. She found the stance her mother taught her with ease, raising the axe above her head and thrusting it forward with a loud, confident battle cry of exertion. The shout caused heads to turn, as was her plan. But the whistling of the weapon through the air followed by the thwack of the axe head burying itself deep into a wooden support across the room caused all conversation to die out instantly. Suddenly, an entire room of heads turned to her, still standing on the table breathing heavily in anger. "Listen up," she cried, face set in determination. She let her eyes rake over the room. "For a pack of angry Vikings determined to get answers, you've got quite an ignorant way of finding them," she spit. Stunned silence. No one moved, no one breathed, as she hopped down off the table, landing gracefully on her feet with a loud smack as her boots contacted the ground. Every face in the hall slowly turned as the eyes of her village followed her stalking steps across the great hall, the crowd shuffling out of her way and creating a path between her and her axe. As much as she wanted to say that she was able to hold on to that energy and confidently stride through the crowd, the sea of faces staring at her with wide eyes and dropped jaws made the strong emotion sizzle out quickly. She did her best to keep her posture strong and her face set, hands folding around the axe handle. She gave it a tug. Her eyes widened and the blood drained from her face. It didn't budge. "Oh Thor, oh Thor, oh Thor, please no, not now." She planted her feet and tugged again, feeling it wiggle ever so slightly but still not release from the wood. Shit 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 shit. In her panic, she yanked again with every bit of force in her body, and the axe head instantly released from the wood. The force sent the weapon and her arms over her shoulder, pulling the rest of her body with her. She prayed to the gods that she was able to bring her facial expressions back under control by the time her body had fully turned, exposing herself to the crowded hall. She cleared her throat and settled her axe onto her shoulder, sauntering up to the council table again with a confidence she absolutely did not have. Walking around the table to take her place again in the middle, she caught Snotlout trying his best to hold back laughter, be it at the pitiful attempt to retrieve her axe, the fact that she just chucked her axe across the entire length of the great hall, or at the outburst that fell between, she wasn't sure. Passing her mother, she heard a soft, "That's my girl," uttered under her breath. Well, at least they weren't angry with her, leadership style. "All right, Zephyr, pull it together." She tried to stand tall and command the room like she always saw her father do, but that just left her feeling ridiculous. So instead, she slammed her axe down flat on the table in front of her, ignoring the pain that quickly bloomed in her fingers as she realized she didn't move them in time, and took a deep breath. And held it. For Thor's sake, she hadn't even thought about what she was supposed to say. The deep breath she had taken practically fell out of her mouth as she realized the faces surrounding her were growing less shocked and more disbelieving. Remember to acknowledge their concerns. Tell the truth. Sometimes, that's all you can do. They may not like what they hear, but they'll respect you more for it later on. Her lips pursed for a moment as she thought through her first words. And then she began to speak. "I understand everyone is confused and concerned. My father did leave with a small force of men in quite a rush, and regrettably did not have time to address you all before setting sail. Earlier this evening, I received a letter." Her voice cracked in pain as she so clearly saw the hurried, desperate script of a frightened air that had been seared into her mind. She paused to give herself a moment to collect her thoughts again, the words she needed to say next caught in her throat. She started again and carefully pushed on. "Earlier this evening, I received a letter of distress from the son of Alvin the Treacherous of Outcast Island. The outcasts were ambushed late in the night. They were unprepared and mostly unaware of the intruders until after they had infiltrated the island. Though we are not sure exactly how many were lost, we've guessed that they lost well over half of their numbers, including, she swallowed hard against the lump in her throat, including Alvin the treacherous himself. A frantic murmur swept through the crowd, and Zephyr let it as she stole a moment to compose herself. Once she felt sure enough that she could continue, she spoke again, and everyone quieted. Eason, son of Alvin and heir to his chiefdom, gathered those that he could on a ship and managed to sneak off of the island, planning to find refuge on Old Burke. My father and his crew are on their way there now with food and medical supplies to offer aid, and bring what remains of the outcast tribe back here to New Burke. Most of the crowd remained quiet, but some made noises of disapproval. One man yelled out, "But we already have the Wingmaiden tribe here." I understand that Zephyr argued as more people made their agreement with the man clear. But the council as a whole unanimously decided to offer aid and sanctuary to whoever is left of the outcast tribe. However, due to how much smaller their numbers are now, accommodating them shouldn't be an issue. Take that as you will. That's ridiculous. The Berserkers should be sending aid, not us. The voices of agreement were growing louder and more numerous. Think, Zephyr, think. If they accuse you of being wrong when you know you aren't, stand up for yourself. Don't ever take no for an answer unless it's the answer you're looking for. Arguing the point is not an option, Zephyr insisted. The ships have left. The Berserkers did not receive the distress signal, only we did. Council determined the outcasts could not wait for us to send a letter to the Berserkers explaining the situation, and then wait longer for the Berserkers to send aid. Either way, a crew must leave Burke, be it to deliver the message or to help the outcasts. Helping the outcasts ourselves was the faster and most efficient option. And if the outcasts were followed by whoever attacked them, my father already has a plan to handle that. Oh gods, please tell me Dad already has a plan to handle that. Who attacked them? Someone else yelled. Zephyr was struggling to stay in control, quickly feeling more overwhelmed than she ever had before. So she flipped through her mind to remember something, anything, any bit of advice her parents had given her. And all she could think of was her father's words, "Stay strong, but don't be afraid to admit if you don't know something or if you were wrong." Oh boy. We're not sure, Zephyr admitted slowly. Though we have reason to believe it was the same people that attacked the Wingmaiden tribe. That news didn't exactly go over well. And just as Zephyr was about to continue, someone else shouted out, "Wait, we haven't had any ships sail in. How did they send a distress letter?" She turned to the direction the voice had come from, and she met the accusing eyes of Spitaloot Jorgensen. It wasn't until then that Zephyr realized she hadn't even explained how she got the letter to council. They were in such a rush to get aid out to the outcasts that it hadn't come up. Which could look extremely suspicious to the rest of the tribe. "Yeah, that's right," someone else agreed. "And how do we know the Berserkers didn't get one too?" More and more shouts began calling out, questioning the origins of the letter, and Zephyr's stomach dropped to her feet. "Quiet," she called out, but the nausea that was overtaking her made her voice weaker than she intended. "Quiet down, let me explain." Some turned their attention to her, but others continued. Zephyr could feel the bile creeping up her throat, the vice beginning to tighten in her chest, the shaking in her hands and feet crawling up her limbs until her entire body shook with an overwhelming fear. "Hey! Your chief ordered you to quiet down." Snotlout cried out beside her, making her jump. Everyone started to comply, but it still took some time. Eventually, Spitaloot sneered, "Well, care to explain, Chiefess?" Zephyr ignored him, more out of nerves than deliberate decision. The letter wasn't received by boat, it was received by bird. That wasn't received well either. Eason has a trained geoforcan that he has worked with since she was young. He was inspired by the terrible Terra mail system my father created years ago. Eason rescued her, so she has a very strong bond with him. He trained her to carry letters to Berserker Island, and then he trained her to carry them here when the outcasts visited for the announcement celebration. They weren't reassured. "How do you know it was the same bird?" A voice from the crowd rose above the rest. "Birds can be intercepted too easily. How do we know this is a legitimate letter? She could have just made it all up." That last one brought the bile to the top of her throat. But then she heard the screech of wood on rock to her right. Zephyr turned in surprise just as her mother's chair slammed into the back wall so hard it bounced back before settling down on all four legs with a slam. Everyone went silent with fear as Mom's eyes burned with rage, setting the whole hall on fire. Who said that? No one answered, but Zephyr could have sworn she saw one Viking in particular awkwardly lower himself onto a bench. You dare accuse my daughter of fabricating all of this? Mom screamed. Zephyr swallowed. Mom, she whispered, sit down, please. Absolutely not. Mom slammed her fist on the table. I will not tolerate unsupported treasonous accusations against the chief. Either of them. Zephyr slowly put her hand on her mother's shoulder. Mom, please, she repeated, stronger this time. I got this. Mom turned to Zephyr, and she saw the fury fizzle out just enough that Mom obliged. She sat down with a huff, fingers tapping the armrest of her chair, itching to reach for her axe. Now, Zephyr said, turning back to the tribe. I helped with Orboda's training. Sorry, Orboda is the bird's name. I helped with her training when Eason brought her to the announcement ceremony. Eason has a very specific harness he uses to secure the letters on her that also tells her where to take them. We also know that the Berserkers didn't get a letter because Orboda came here. Council saw the letter and analyzed it themselves. We know it's from Eason. Decisions were already made, these points are not up for debate. She relaxed her body, suddenly realizing she had leaned over the table on balled fists at some point during her explanation. It's been a long night, she continued. A lot has happened, and there's a lot still that needs to be done. For now, we all just need to go back to our homes and rest. Expect additional orders in the next few days to prepare for the outcasts' arrival. Feel free to take all the time you need to get started in the morning, but I expect everyone to be started on their duties by the afternoon. She stopped talking, finished with what she had planned to say. But then everyone stared at her like they expected more. But she didn't have more to say. Dismissed, Snotlout muttered under his breath in her direction. Dismissed, she stammered a little louder than she had planned as she attempted to cover up her uncertainty. It probably made it more obvious. As everyone began to filter out of the hall, Zephyr managed to stiffly follow her mother back to the council room, Snotlout following closely behind. And then she started to hyperventilate. Snotlout quickly closed the door and caught her from behind before she fell. Mom rushed in front of her and squeezed her shoulders. Hey, Zephyr, hey, it's okay, she said. You did it. You did amazing, sweetheart. Dad would be so proud of you. You really were pretty awesome in there, Zephyr, Snotlout added. Zephyr shook her head and tried to bring her breathing under control. That was terrible, she gasped. No. Mom argued, it wasn't. No one started a revolt, they all calmly left. No one is questioning you anymore. Honestly, some of your father's addresses have gone much worse. Zephyr was still gasping as Snotlout lowered her into a nearby chair. Really? She's got a point, Snotlout agreed. Zephyr nodded a little and leaned forward, suddenly dizzy. And then she dropped her head in her hands. Oh gods. I threw an axe at them. Snotlout laughed. Yeah, that was the best part. Zephyr heard a loud smack that she assumed was her mother hitting his arm. Hiccup, 4 days after the siege of Outcast Island. Of all the sea voyages Hiccup had taken away from the village since he had to take over for his father, no trip worried him more than this one. Astrid was home, pregnant with their 5th child at an age that most women feared pregnancy. He was sailing into God's knew what to save an ally tribe with the quickest assembled crew and provisions he had ever ordered. Said ally was currently being led by a broken boy of 17 who had just watched his father being murdered before his eyes. Knowing that, Hiccup was having an overwhelming amount of flashbacks to the day his own father died before his eyes, which made concentrating difficult. And worst of all, he had left his baby girl back home in charge of a pack of wolves that were ready to eat her alive. And no matter how capable he believed her to be, the guilt was eating him alive. But what else was he supposed to do? He had to keep reminding himself of that as they approached the harbor statues. What else were you supposed to do? It didn't necessarily make him feel any better, but it forced him to focus on the task at hand. The minute he could clearly see the harbor statues, he turned quickly on his heels and began barking orders, possibly sounding a little harsher than he intended. When the crews heard what had happened to the outcasts, they seemed just as anxious to complete the trip as Hiccup felt. After sailing through the first night and into the day, they tried to stop and rest at a common camping spot for them. But they all quickly realized that sleep was not coming easily to any of them, and the two crews collectively decided to continue sailing through the night once again despite the added danger of the darkness. But what else could they do? They managed to stop and rest for one night. With a typical crew and one ship, the trip to Old Burke would take 3 or 4 days. With a bare-bones crew for 2 ships such as the one they were running now, that travel time could easily double for needed breaks. They approached the harbor statues early on day 4. Understandably, they were all exhausted, Hiccup included. But what else could they do? Be extra vigilant steering into the harbor, watch for any unusual ships. Hiccup yelled. He faintly heard Irette yelling what he assumed were similar orders on the other ship. Apprentices, come with me, we need all medical supplies on deck immediately. I know we're tight on manpower, but any available crew needs to help us as well. Food can wait until the most critical are patched up. Be gentle where you can. We don't know what these people have seen or who is left. The crew was eerily silent as they followed the orders they were given. No one spoke as supplies were moved and prepared and the harbor statues slipped silently by. But as soon as the outcasts came into view, Hiccup was glad they had worked so hard to get here quickly. They looked terrible. The majority of those gathered around the docks were elderly and children. Some young women seemed interspersed between them, luckily in good enough shape to tend to the injured and sick. A few young men also moved between them, probably sailing apprentices by the way they focused on the ship. Still, it seems no one in the tribe had the energy, motivation, or ability to move very far from the docks. Many of them still lay on the ship's deck, which made Hiccup uneasy. They must have had to send the young women and apprentices to the Great Hall to carry down what supplies they could. Which also meant they were disturbingly exposed. Hiccup looked across the water and found Irette appeared to have similar concerns when he made eye contact. Hiccup signaled to Irette to slow down and let his ship enter the dock further ahead of them in the hopes to keep from overwhelming the outcasts. As Irette nodded and turned to enact the orders he was given, Hiccup made his way to the bow of the ship to make their intentions clear in case the able-bodied outcasts mobilized to protect the sick and injured. They did begin to mobilize, but it seemed the young men that Hiccup had assumed were sailing apprentices were the only ones that moved to protect. That concerned him as it was, but it wasn't until he got his first look at Eason that his blood truly ran cold. To say the boy looked terrible was a laughable understatement. He was pale and ghostly, floating around as if his body was working but his soul had left it behind. He was an empty shell of the shy, curious boy he had seen in the last few months. Even from out in the harbor, Hiccup could see the deep, dark bags under his eyes. He must not have slept since the raid, and if he did it was not a peaceful rest by far. Not that Hiccup could blame him. He remembered those nights after Stoic died. Hiccup shivered, suddenly terrified to learn of the nature of the raid, and Alvin's death especially. The moment Eason recognized Hiccup, he finally saw a glimmer of emotion, but it was so desperate and broken that he almost wished he hadn't. Eason called off the boys and began struggling to ask them what to do. Gods, he was so young. Hiccup had been in his 20s when his father died. Not much better, but Eason was only 17, and Hiccup had experience leading the Dragon Riders on Dragon's Edge for a few years. Eason was barely of age, and he knew Alvin hadn't even begun to prepare him to take the throne. And to have to take it like this. Maybe it was just the protective father coming out in Hiccup, but suddenly any exhaustion he felt left his body. Get that gangplank down and start unloading those supplies, he ordered the crew. They obliged without a word. Irette's ship anchored down at an adjacent dock as Hiccup grabbed a few boxes himself to carry off the ship. Eason ran up to Hiccup as he deposited the boxes on the dock. Chief Haddock, I have to admit I'm really relieved to see you. Hiccup straightened and grasped Eason's shoulder. Eason, please, call me Hiccup. You and I are equals now more than ever. He squeezed his shoulder and added, it's going to be all right. Eason managed to nod once in response. Hiccup turned to Irette and Toughnut as they approached from the adjacent dock. Let's get these supplies out and get them taken care of. Well, rest for a bit, but I'd rather not stay long. We're much more exposed here than we will be in New Burke. Turning back to Eason, he explained further, we brought what we could of healing supplies and provisions, and Tough Nut has some of his apprentices with him to help. My hope is to get everyone patched up enough to make one more sail. We'll take our ships and leave yours here, if that's okay. That way if anyone manages to follow your tribe out here, it'll be harder for them to follow us to New Burke. We'll provide sanctuary for your tribe there. It's up to you. Eason seemed to barely register what was being said to him. He nodded numbly and turned towards the young men watching them cautiously. Osmond, you guys help them unload. Show them who needs the most help and stuff. The boy Hiccup assumed was Osmond nodded and waved to the other young men to follow him. Hiccup turned to Eret and Tough Nut. Fish Legs is below deck. Use your best judgment to get these people taken care of as quickly as possible. I'm going to discuss what the damage is with Eason. Aye, Chief Eret replied. Tough Nut was already scanning over the outcast tribe, but he nodded absent-mindedly in response. Hiccup squeezed Eason's shoulder. Let's talk in private. Eason nodded vacantly in return with downcast eyes. Hiccup gently led him onto the ship and below the deck, repeating his orders to Fish Legs as he passed by. Fish Legs began to speak, but stopped himself as his eyes fell on the shell of the boy between them. He simply nodded instead, and nonchalantly redirected the other Vikings to the supplies on the opposite side of the boat. Hiccup pushed the door of his quarters open and silently waved Eason inside. Eason nodded slowly and complied, taking a deep breath as Hiccup followed and shut the door behind them. Okay, so. For the most part, I think we're hanging in there. I mean plenty of people got sick on the sail over, and we didn't have much on the ship to get us here, but once we did get here. Eason, slow down, Hiccup gently interrupted. We'll get to that. Eason looked confused. But I thought. I know, and all the stuff you're telling me is very important, he reassured. But we'll get there. He gestured to a chair sitting in front of his desk. Are you okay? Eason's eyes flicked to the chair and back to Hiccup. I'm fine, he quickly said. Hiccup chuckled darkly. Well, I admire your resolve. He leaned against his desk, looking at the floor. It's an important thing to have as a leader. He lifted his eyes and studied Eason carefully. His whole body was tense, his face tired, his eyes unfocused. He was struggling to keep his composure, and must have been for a while now. But you have to let yourself be human at some point, son. Eason flinched. Sorry, Hiccup apologized quietly with an understanding smile. He took a deep breath. You've done an incredible job so far. I had other people help me fill a boat and sail to another island, he said humorlessly, clearly unimpressed with himself. Sure, but did you lose anyone between here and there? Eason thought for a moment before quietly recalling, no. Hiccup nodded. No one appears to be trying to riot against you, either. Those young men seem to follow your command without question. After what you and your tribe must have gone through, that's all I need to know to say you've done a great job. Eason didn't have anything to say. Hiccup kept his voice low and soft. You've done remarkably, despite the fact that you've suffered tremendously. 3 of my most trusted men are ready to care for your people. Take advantage of that and let yourself rest. You've earned it. Eason hesitated at first but then lifted his eyes, at which point Hiccup gestured to the chair again with his head. Eason wavered for a moment, steeled himself, but eventually gave in and sank into the chair. Satisfied, Hiccup silently pulled up an extra chair from the side of the room, not wanting to make Eason feel cut off from him by taking his seat in the captain's chair. He sat next to the boy instead, letting him relish in the silence. But the boy couldn't seem to relax. The longer the silence stretched, the more uncomfortable he looked, which was the opposite effect Hiccup was trying to elicit. Want to talk about what happened back there? Hiccup spoke the words as softly as he could, but Eason still jumped. He shook his head. No, I don't think so. I don't think I'm ready for that. Hiccup nodded. That's fair. It took me a long time to be able to really talk about. Well, you know. Eason nodded. Hiccup pursed his lips and thought for a moment. But you have to talk about it at some point, he added. It doesn't have to be now, it doesn't have to be the minute we get to New Burke. But you'll never be able to heal from it until you do. Ethan bit his lip, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't think I'll ever be able to heal from it, he quietly choked. You will, Hiccup assured him. It doesn't feel like it now, but you will eventually. He shook his head. But you didn't see what happened. To a sob cut off Ethan's words, and he tried to compose himself. For a moment, Hiccup thought he managed to. But suddenly he stood up, seemingly lost as he reached out for nothing, clenching his hands in the air and then his clothes and then his hair. He gripped the back of the chair he had been sitting in and rocked back and forth a few times. He slammed his fist on the chair back and spun around, running his hands through his hair again, loosening the strands from the leather tie. He spun back around, eyes pouring tears now. It's not fair, he yelled helplessly. It's not. It's. He reached into the air again for the words, but only grew more frustrated when he couldn't grasp them. He cried out and kicked the legs of the chair, knocking it over. He slammed his fists on the desk and cried out more, over and over and over again. Hiccup stood and carefully approached the broken boy before him. He wasn't angry with him as he tore through the captain's quarters, yelling and punching and kicking and screaming, "It's not fair. Why did he have to do it? Why him?" Over and over and over again. Because he knew. He remembered that feeling. That irrational anger that overwhelmed him as he saw his father's lifeless body lying still and cold before him. But at least he had Astrid and his mother there to hold him, support him. And that was the only thing that helped him hold on to whatever bit of sanity he had. Ethan had no one. And so all Hiccup could bring himself to do was calculate his approach so Ethan wouldn't unknowingly punch or kick him. He carefully grabbed Ethan's wrists, and the boy fought back with a strength that could have knocked Hiccup to the ground if it was properly channeled. Ethan struggled, but eventually Hiccup was able to wrestle the boy to his chest and lock his arms around him. Ethan weakly fought back, but by now his chest was heaving with sobs rather than angered cries. "I know," Hiccup whispered. "I know, son, it's all right." And Ethan crumbled. His knees buckled to the point that Hiccup had to hold him up as he sobbed into his shoulder. And Hiccup let him. Because he didn't get to mourn his father like Hiccup did. He didn't get to give his father a proper funeral like Hiccup did. He didn't have anyone there to tell him he was doing the right thing like Hiccup did. He wasn't able to save his tribe like Hiccup did. And while Hiccup wanted to do so much more for this poor boy in his arms, this was the best he had. "I know," Hiccup repeated helplessly. Argo, 4 days after the siege of Outcast Island. Argo let his eyes scan over the tribe before him. Chief Boyra's orders had been sudden and a little unsettling, but Argo had decided he would not question them. And apparently, neither would his tribe. And so he was now left taking in the aftermath of the attack. The tribe around him was struggling with the events of the days prior, understandably. What Boyra had asked of his people, and what his people had done to comply with his requests, had been frankly disturbing. They had left the targeted island in shambles, scattered with bodies that had not been granted the honor of a proper grave, in the midst of a village that had been burned to the ground and looted for anything useful. And the tribe around him showed how shocked they were by it now that the smoke had settled. A young woman stepped up to him, offering bandages and plants he assumed were meant to have healing effects. He politely declined. As the direct advisor to Chief Boyra, he was kept from the bulk of the fighting, and ended up mostly unharmed. She nodded with a smile and continued on to the next injured soul. Argo wasn't exactly excited to interact with anyone else right now anyway. He had made a major mistake, attempting to get information in the markets about the whereabouts of New Burke and confusing them with Outcast Island. A mistake that, after seeing the way Boyra had treated his own tribe, he was certain would end with his death. Until he was presented with an opportunity to save himself. Well, hopefully save himself. His new mission could easily still end in his death. But at least it gave him a chance, stretched out his final days if it didn't save him. But the guilt inside him was eating him alive. Harva. He looked around for whoever the young chief was looking for, but he didn't see anyone else close by. Harva. Oh shit. Argo is Harva, right? He looked up into the young chief's face. Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to bother you. Would you mind helping Osmond and the guys get everyone boarded on the new Burke ships? He nodded and stood. He just had to keep his identity hidden until he figured out what he needed to. Notes. Alright, now that I've smacked you with that. My updated schedule. I am beginning my final semester of university, and because of the requirements of my major, it's going to be jam-packed with clinical hours, class hours, and I will still have to fit in as many work hours as I can to cover my living expenses. So while I am going to try my absolute best to squeeze in some writing as well, unfortunately I just can't promise a regular update schedule. However, since I graduate in April, that means I should have no interruptions come this summer. There will be a bit of a transition period as I get settled into my first job, but I'm hoping things will calm down way more than what they are now and what they will be this spring. I will absolutely keep you guys posted as best as I can. You can find updates on my Tumblr page, see bio for link, and I always keep in touch via my Discord server, link in bio and at end of story. So with that, see you, hopefully, soon. Chapter 18, Reunion. Notes. Hello my beautiful readers. I was finally able to get another chapter done, and chapter 19 is also mostly written. Hopefully I'll have that next chapter 2 weeks from now for y'all, but for now, enjoy. Chapter text. Zephyr was a little. Just maybe a tad. Maybe, like. Alright, fine. She was exhausted. She was completely and utterly beyond exhausted. It had been barely a week and she was already wondering how her father found the energy to do this all day, every single day, without fail. And wondering even more how she was going to be able to take over for him. And yet at the same time, a whole week. It had already been a week since her father had left for Old Burke with the 2 ships and their crews. A week that somehow had both dragged on endlessly and blown by far too quickly all at the same time. Zephyr, Astrid, and Snotlout had done their best to keep the peace and keep up day-to-day activities. The only changes Zephyr had implemented as acting chief were the necessary preparations for the outcast refugees. Not that much could be implemented, not before they had more information about the outcast island raid, and Zephyr thanked the gods for that, because even those few adjustments were difficult to introduce. For the most part, everyone had followed Zephyr's orders respectfully and promptly. If anyone grumbled about who the orders came from, they did so behind closed doors. Which, Zephyr had to admit, was a very pleasant surprise, and she would happily take that over the alternative. But it was the smaller portion of the tribe who adamantly resisted Zephyr's newly appointed role that really created problems, mostly grumbly old men who more than likely had some kind of ties with a particular Jorgensen. But that was a touchy subject that was not to be brought up around Snotlout, as he had already mentioned aloud multiple times that he would not hesitate to kill his father if he acted out like that. No one was particularly eager to see if Snotlout meant those words literally or figuratively. But all of those problems from the last week seemed completely insignificant when Holger notified Snotlout of ships approaching. Zephyr was instantly overwhelmed with emotions, and she could only imagine her mother was too. Astrid ran to warn Runner and Valka of the approaching ships, letting them know to make sure stew was on the fire and sleeping quarters were ready for the outcasts. Zephyr found herself worrying that Grammy Valka would run out of rooms far too quickly, afraid that there were more outcasts than they estimated. Maybe if she got a look at how many ships were approaching, she'd be able to get a better idea. If it was still only 2 ships, then maybe their estimates were right. If it was more, then she may have to scramble to find additional quarters. So while Astrid was busy with her task, Zephyr decided to take a quick detour on her way to warn Rough Nut. Zephyr climbed the stairs to the lookout post quicker than she typically would have, too focused on the fact that a ship within sight was carrying her father and her friend back to her island. She didn't think twice before scrambling up the last few steps and fishing her eyeglass her father had gifted her years ago out of her bag. Stepping up to the southwestern-facing edge, she lifted the eyeglass and peered out nervously. But a voice behind her interrupted her before she was able to get a good look. "Hey, you kids know the rules, you're not supposed to be." She quickly turned, a bit angry at the interruption and not afraid to let it show on her face. It had been a long week, and she was already running on minimal sleep and even littler patience. The man swallowed his words. "Oh, sorry. Chiefess." Zephyr narrowed her eyes, noticing the hesitation before he forced out Chiefess. I think it best you find Snotlout and help prepare the lifts. She tried not to spit the words, but she very well may have anyway. He grumbled an unintelligible response, but made his way down the stairs anyway. The rest of the men on the lookout post seemed to avoid both his and Zephyr's glances. She sighed in frustration and turned back to the sea. She couldn't see much yet as they were still quite far off. But she could clearly see there were only 2 ships, and they appeared to be the same ships that had left the island a week early. Which, she had to admit, eased her conscience. She just had to remind herself not to let down her guard yet. Just in case. That would be a fool's mistake. Keep an eye on those ships as they approach. Alert Snotlout or me if anything seems off at any point. And if those ships look like they're overflowing with people, come to me immediately. A few men nodded, 2 or 3 mumbled variations of "Aye, yes, Chief," and a few made no indications they heard her at all. Which fell in line with the theme of the week, unfortunately. One more day. One more day, and then Dad would be home. And then they could go from there. She scurried down the stairs and ran off to the healing hut, where Rough Nut had taken over in Tough Nut's place. She passed the forge on her way and poked her head in long enough to let Grandpappy Gobber and Nuffink know that the ships should reach the lifts by the evening. Spro peeped out of Dad's workshop with wide eyes, and Zephyr knew exactly what he was thinking. She narrowed her eyes and pointed at him. "Stay with Grandpappy, please." "Same to you," she added in Nuffink's direction. Nuffink nodded as Spro huffed and whined, "But Zephy." "No, stay with Grandpappy. Daddy has a lot of stuff to get off the ship and a lot of people to help. Just be patient, buddy. If we let him get his stuff done, we'll get to spend more time with him tonight. Deal." He sighed and rolled his eyes. "Deal." Zephyr smiled. "Thank you, Bubba. Love you. Love you, sissy." "I'll make sure he stays," Nuffink said, keeping his focus on a piece of metal he was working on. Zephyr caught Gobber's eye, who silently let her know he'd keep them both nearby. She smiled. "Thanks, Nuff," she said, but she was looking at Gobber, who smiled back in understanding. She ran the remaining distance to the healing hut and stepped inside, working her way to the back of the expanded structure where Tough Nut's quarters were, and where Rough Nut was currently staying. But when she heard a deep voice floating out of what had become Minden's room, she paused. "I'll be back tonight once we get the outcasts settled, all right?" Snotlout said quietly. Minden laughed weakly. "Snotlout, I'm fine. Do what you need to, I'm not going anywhere." The voices quieted, and Zephyr couldn't help peeking through the crack in the door, moving as silently as she could manage. Minden was lying in her bed, buried under as many blankets as they must have been able to find. The only parts of her exposed were her head and one arm. Her exposed hand was clutched in Snotlout's left hand, as his right hand was pressed into the side of her bed, holding up his torso as he leaned over top of her. He gazed into her eyes with a passion that Zephyr had never seen in her uncle before, mixed with equal amounts of joy and sadness. Minden seemed to share the same gaze, some mix of joy, sadness, contentment, and fear. "You better not," Snotlout whispered. A small smile graced Minden's lips. "You're not getting off that easy this time. Not if I have anything to say about it." Zephyr expected Snotlout to chuckle or smile or both. But he didn't. His eyes grew more sad, and he leaned closer to her until his forehead rested against hers. They both closed their eyes, and Snotlout took a deep breath as if breathing her in. "I don't want to get off that easy again. Not if it means I lose you." Zephyr could barely hear the words now. Minden didn't even smile sadly like she always seemed to do. She only squeezed her eyes shut tighter like she was holding back tears. "Good," she breathed. Snotlout slowly leaned in further, brushing his lips gently against hers. Zephyr had seen her parents share many, many kisses over the years. But from what she could recall, she hadn't seen anything like this. There was a sort of desperation in them both, an unspoken fear that neither wanted to speak into fruition. And yet they remained gentle and passionate, as if silently agreeing that no matter what may happen to them, they had to savor these moments in case there were no more moments to be had. Those were all emotions she had seen her parents and some of their kisses, like the ones before Dad went off on a long sea voyage. But what made this one so different is a mourning for the years already lost in the past that they would never be able to recover, opportunities that they would not have a chance to live. And the regret they both knew they would feel if they lost the future moments as well. Zephyr quietly stepped back before they were able to break the kiss, feeling a little intrusive in their private moment. Besides, she had work to do, she reminded herself. She shook off the sadness of what she had just witnessed and pushed further on into the healing hut. Rough Nut was already rustling around in her back study. Did Snotlout already let you know the ships are headed in? Zephyr cleared her throat and asked. Rough Nut didn't look up. Yeah, he did. Is he in there with Minden again? Yep. Zephyr looked around. Need any help? I don't think so. Tough Nut should have everybody pretty stable after a week. Well. At least the ones that have a chance of making it. Rough Nut and Zephyr both fell silent. Zephyr swallowed. Well. Send one of the apprentices if you need anything. Will do, Rough Nut acknowledged, still rummaging through and counting supplies. Zephyr nodded, mostly to herself, and started out of the room. Oh, Zeph. She turned around to see Rough Nut now focused on her. Yeah. Rough Nut's focus intensified on Zephyr. You've done a really good job this past week. I hope you know that. Zephyr blushed. Thanks, Rough. I mean it, she reinforced. Hiccup will be really proud of how you handled everything. I think you're really starting to prove yourself. She lowered her head a little to intensify her glance further. And I don't just mean to counsel. Zephyr smiled awkwardly. She wasn't so sure about that, but she appreciated her aunt's faith in her. Thanks, Rough. Really? Before Rough Nut could add anything else, she headed out of the hut, noticing that Minden was quietly lying in her room alone now. Maybe it was just because she witnessed the intimate moment earlier, but she felt she could feel Minden's sadness flowing out of the room like a river. And for some reason in that moment Zephyr couldn't help but think about Eason. She clutched the blue gem, sapphire, that was what Uncle Fishlegs had called it, that hung from the black leather around her neck as she quietly closed the main door behind her. She hadn't taken the necklace off since she first put it on a week ago, and in that moment she was convinced she never would. She just wanted to know if he was okay. But standing outside of the healing hut, she had no idea what to do. Preparations would have begun throughout the village already, but everyone already knew what to do. Sure, she could wander the village in case anything came up, but it was fairly early still, and the ships wouldn't make it to the island until the afternoon at least. Zephyr had made sure to have things prepared fairly early in case she encountered more resistance, so the only thing not done would be the stew that should already be cooking by now. Eventually Zephyr decided to take a sweep around the village before relieving her mother, who was no doubt overworking herself by this point. Not that Zephyr could blame her, she was surely anxious to see Dad after a week of him being gone. She typically handled his absences well, but they were always more difficult on her when she was pregnant. And this was the first time that not only was she pregnant, but Dad was potentially facing legitimate threats. She made her rounds in the village and found her mother, at which point she made a valiant effort to convince her mother to relax to no avail. So she followed her around for the morning to keep an eye on her while the hours dragged on. The best she managed was convincing Astrid to stop and eat something for lunch. The two shared an incredibly uncomfortable silence with their meal, something that was very uncommon for the two of them. Zephyr bit her lip. How are you feeling? She asked for probably the 12th time this hour. Astrid sighed and chuckled, also aware of the frequency. You're just like your dad, you know. Zephyr chuckled and blushed. Sorry. It's nothing to be sorry about, Astrid reassured her. It's just funny to see sometimes. They both silently pushed their food around on their plates. Astrid must have noticed Zephyr becoming restless. Why don't you go check with the lookout post? Astrid suggested. Zephyr bit her lip. She could feel Astrid watching her carefully. I'm pretty tired, so I was going to try to get some rest before the ships reached the island, she slowly continued. Would you let me know when they're almost here? Zephyr glanced up to her mother, who seemed more concerned about Zephyr than anything else. She did want to check on the ship's progress. Astrid smiled. Go on, I'll be here. Maybe check in with your grandmothers to make sure everything is about ready on your way back, yeah? She examined her mother again for no reason in particular, and eventually nodded and stood with her plate in her hand. Leave your dishes, love, I'll clean up from lunch, Astrid offered. Zephyr nodded again and set her plate down before wrapping herself in her furs and heading out into the chilly afternoon air. She made her way to the lookout post, where she noted that the ships were close enough at least to tell that they didn't seem overly crowded. The information was both concerning and a relief for Zephyr. The ships still seemed to be a few hours out though, so she went to Grammy Runner to make sure everything in the Great Hall was prepared. Of course it was, since everyone seemed to be just as anxious to get the ships home and everyone settled so they could all once again adjust to a new normal. Grammy Valka seemed equally prepared, and Zephyr was no longer as concerned about running out of space. Obviously the guest quarters wouldn't do as permanent residences, but they would be fine until other arrangements could be made. Rough Nut was as prepared as she could be, not knowing what exactly may be needed of her and her apprentices. And so everyone was simply waiting again. Zephyr hated waiting. She found herself wandering to the forge, not sure what else to do or why exactly that was the place she decided to go. Grandpappy looked at her with knowing and sympathetic eyes and gave her tasks to keep her busy without question. Nuffink was quiet as well, though Spro seemed largely unfazed, only excited that Daddy was almost home. The tasks Grandpappy had given her barely kept her busy, but eventually, thankfully, the hours finally passed. One of the lookouts found Zephyr and told her the ships were close enough that the lifts should be prepared. She apologized to Gobber for having to leave but was out of the forge before she could hear his response. In record time, the area around the skydocks was buzzing with activity, both of workers and watchers. Snotlout was focused on commanding the lifts as he had a much better understanding of them than Zephyr did yet. Zephyr focused her attention on gathering who she could to unload the boats, breaking them into teams to help expedite the process. The sooner the ships could be stashed away in the holding cove, the better. And the sooner the outcasts could be ushered into the safety and warmth of the Great Hall, the better. Finally, the first team of Vikings were loaded onto the lift and sent down with Rough Nut. The first load that came back up with the lift were mostly Vikings that needed additional care. Zephyr couldn't help but notice many of them looked like sick elders and injured children, and she wasn't sure how that made her feel. She could see Rough Nut ushering the group off the lift as quickly as possible, giving the apprentices an order before jogging over to Zephyr. "Hey, Zeph, we have quite a few injured and sick that tough and I don't feel comfortable moving all the way back to the hut. Where do you want me to set up shop?" Well, if she didn't want to take them back to the healing hut, then the guest quarters won't work. They were the same distance from the docks as the hut was. The closest buildings were homes, and although the Vikings of Newburgh were typically gracious hosts, she didn't want to push her luck. "Can they make it to the Great Hall?" Zephyr asked. "Should be fine, yeah." Zephyr nodded. "Just set them up near the fire, keep them warm. That way they can stay close to the rest of the tribe and they're not so exposed." "Got it, Chief." Rough Nut saluted and ran back to the apprentices and broken outcasts. Zephyr winced. She hadn't been able to figure out why Rough Nut and Snotlout had been calling her chief at any and every opportunity. It made her nervous. As more outcasts poured off of the lifts group by group, Zephyr directed Newburgians to lead them to the Great Hall. She tried not to focus too much on the fact that they were all elders and children, and all things considered, there weren't that many of them. She saw a couple men that looked to be a little older than her, and some women of the same age, but there were only a handful of them. They all looked frightened and jumpy and on edge. Gods, Zephyr just wanted to talk to Eason. What the hell happened to these people? "Chiefess, I haven't seen any signs of additional ships following ours in." Zephyr turned to find Holger jogging up to her. She liked Holger. He respected her more than any of the other Burkians, save Council. "Do you need any more hands down here?" Zephyr looked around the controlled chaos spilling through the skydocks. They didn't seem to have many supplies left, and most of the elder and child outcasts had already been transferred to the Great Hall. However, she did know that more hands made it easier to stash the boats away, though she still didn't quite understand the mechanisms of the boat lifts. "Send a few men down to help store the boats. But we should probably still keep an eye out for any shadows until the boats are hidden away." "Thanks, Holger. Aye, Chiefess, I'll be sure they do. Any other concerns I can help ye with? Zephyr wasn't sure what came over her. But as she scanned the crowd before confirming that things were going well enough over here, she saw the tall boy with the dark beard and half of his hair messily tied back behind his head stumbling off of the lift, and she couldn't help herself. Thor Almighty, she breathed. She didn't even think to complete her orders to Holger before she bolted across the clearing. Ethan. He looked up bewildered just in time to see her racing towards him, but barely had time to register what was happening before she launched herself at him. He stumbled back a few steps as she latched her arms around his neck. Gods, she had forgotten how tall he was. She awkwardly tried to reach down with her toes enough to balance the two of them, but she refused to let go of him. After a moment, he came back to his senses enough to wrap his arms around her. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she ordered in a shaky voice, muffled slightly by his shoulder. She felt his body relax around her. "I'm sorry," he instantly breathed. "It's okay," she said. She tried to shake away the tears that were threatening to fall. "It's okay. You're safe, and you're home. That's all that matters." He started to say something else, but buried his head deep into Zephyr's neck instead, tightening his hold on her. "Ethan. What's wrong?" Zephyr tried to pull back to look at him, but his grip on her was too solid. He shook his head. I can't, not right now." She wanted to push further, but something in her gut told her to wait. So instead she nodded and simply embraced him. "It's okay. It'll be okay, we'll figure it out." She glanced up to find her mother watching them intently. Snotlout had taken over the conversation with the slightly bewildered Holger next to her. Zephyr felt her cheeks bloom with redness, a little embarrassed by her sudden emotional outburst. She expected her mother to look disappointed in her. But she didn't. Astrid merely looked concerned. She subtly motioned in the direction of their home with her head, suggesting to Zephyr that she take Ethan away from the commotion. Zephyr nodded slightly back, letting her mother know that she understood. "Hey," she softly said to Ethan, "why don't we get everyone up to the Great Hall, okay? My grandparents have some hot stew waiting for your tribe, and we can get them all warmed up and taken care of there before we show them to their beds. And then maybe we can step away for a minute, have some. You know," she struggled to find the right words. "Time for yourself." Ethan hesitantly released her, but didn't pull away very far. With his face still so close to hers, she really got a good look at him for the first time, and she was glad his eyes were closed so he couldn't see her reaction. He really did look terrible. His eyes were sunken and rubbed raw, the skin around them cracking and glowing an angry red. Below his eyes were so dark they looked more like he had gotten two black eyes rather than just the effects of sleeplessness. He looked emaciated and ghostly. Zephyr could feel her heart shatter, and she slowly reached up to cup his cheek in her hand. She wasn't sure why, but it felt right. He slowly opened his eyes to meet hers, and a sad smile crept its way across his face. "I know, I look like shit," he croaked. Zephyr had to hold back a gasp. She tried to smile back. "I didn't say that." His eyes seemed so distant, like any trace of the old Ethan was gone. His eyes trailed down her face and stopped just above her chest, where his smile faded and his eyes widened slightly, a bit of pink blooming in his cheeks. "You're wearing the necklace," he said, more of a quietly shocked statement than a question. Zephyr's cheeks bloomed red as well. "I was worried about you," was the only response she could manage. He met her eyes again, where she found a new kind of sadness, maybe longing, that she hadn't seen in him a moment earlier. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. She smiled softly at him. "Why don't we try to get some food in you, all right? You look like you haven't eaten in weeks." He blushed brighter and grew sad again. Zephyr felt a little guilty. She found herself gently squeezing his hand like she'd seen her mother do when her father was upset. "Hey, it's okay. You've been through a lot. We just gotta try to get you better now, okay?" He couldn't quite meet her eyes now as they were locked onto her hand holding his, but he nodded. She nodded back. "Okay. Stay here for a second, I'm going to go check in with Dad, all right?" He nodded again, still watching their hands. Zephyr was now overly aware of the way his hand felt in her fingers. She slowly let go, trying to ignore how her newly exposed skin tingled where the cold wind blew against it, and gave him one last glance before turning back towards the docks. She shivered as she turned her back on Ethan. The emptiness in his eyes was seared into her brain. They were so dull, so absent. He always seemed so analytical when she saw him. He was always so animated. But now all of that was just gone. What the hell had he seen? She found her father helping to unload the last of the supplies from the lift as the ships were being raised into the holding cove. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps approaching. "Dad," she said, locking her arms around him. "Thank the gods you're home safely." He hugged her back tightly. "You can say that again. How were things around here?" Zephyr shrugged. "Could have been worse." He nodded. "I'll take that." He looked her up and down. "You already saw Ethan, didn't you?" Zephyr turned her head to where she left Ethan. He stood quietly watching the commotion around him, not really seeming to absorb what he was seeing. She grimaced and turned back to Hiccup. "Yeah." Hiccup nodded slowly, still watching the young man. "He's struggling a lot, isn't he?" Hiccup scoffed sadly. "That's an understatement, but yeah." Zephyr bit her lip. Did he say anything to you?" Hiccup sighed. "Nothing concrete, no." He thought for a minute before adding, "Do you think you can try to loosen him up a bit? We need to meet tonight, but at this rate he won't say anything. I could get him to talk the whole 4 days I was with him, but maybe he'll open up to you." Zephyr stuttered, I don't know if that's really. Just try to get him to calm down a little bit," he offered. "You're the best bet we've got, Zeph. He's closer to you than anyone else." Zephyr bit her lip again, looking back at Ethan, who was now talking to another outcast boy. "I'm not asking you to have a deep heart-to-heart with him. Just maybe help him feel more at home." Hiccup pinched his brows together. He could use some stability right now. Zephyr thought for a moment, trying to decide the best place to do something like that. Her mother suggested taking Ethan back to their home, but she didn't feel that was the most private spot, not with the chance of her family coming home. Well, why not show him where she always goes? She nodded slowly. "Okay. I think I can manage that." Hiccup hugged her again and kissed her hair. "That's my girl. I've got things from here, go take care of your friend, okay?" She nodded and made his way back over to Ethan. The young man standing in front of him turned and bowed his head slightly. "Pardon me, miss," he said. "Am I interrupting anything?" she asked, carefully watching Ethan. No, nothing important." "Harver, can you check with Osmond? He probably knows better than I do." "Aye, sir," the boy, Harver, apparently, said. Ethan grimaced. "Harver, please, you're older than me. You really don't need to call me sir." Harver apologized quickly. "Sorry, sir, Ethan. All due respect, ye are the chief, though." Harver turned in search of Osmond, and Ethan groaned quietly and scrubbed his face with the heels of his hands. "Don't I know?" he muttered. Zephyr grimaced sympathetically. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "Not even a little," he replied instantly. Zephyr nodded slowly and bit her lip. "Well, I think my dad has things covered for now. Why don't we get away for a little bit?" Ethan started to say something, but stopped himself and looked carefully at Zephyr. "What do you mean?" "Well, I thought. I kind of had," she sighed. "Just, come here, okay? I want to show you something." He watched her carefully again. She smiled a little slyly, suddenly having an idea to lighten the mood. "Can you just trust me for once?" she teased, terribly mocking the tone he had used when he said the same words to her during her announcement celebration. She saw the smallest flicker of a smile as he quietly chuckled and teased back, "I'm not the one of the two of us with trust issues." The smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and the teasing tone of his voice still wasn't that strong, but it was progress. And she'd take that for now. She reached out her arm, intended to offer him her hand, but she hesitated and pulled her arms around her torso instead. Come on, she said, gesturing for him to follow her with her head. He nodded and followed as she started to walk towards the trees at the southwest corner of the island. The walk was quiet as they made their way through the village. Neither of them were particularly excited by all the glances and outright stares that were directed their way. The cover of the trees offered some relief though, and once they had gone a ways under the canopy, Ethan quietly said, "The new furs are nice." Zephyr blushed, but she wasn't sure why. She had honestly forgotten she still had them on. "Thanks. Mom gave them to me right after Dad left." She saw Ethan nod out of the corner of her eye. "It suits you." "Thanks," she repeated, not sure what else to say. They continued in silence until Zephyr found the slight cliff she was looking for. She removed the clasp of her furs and hung them on a nearby branch, as she had quickly found over the week that climbing up to her hideaway was quite difficult with the loose fabric around her. She glanced shyly at Ethan. It's a pretty easy climb. I've been up here so many times that I've sort of worn some pretty big footholds in the rocks. It's not very far up either. See those hanging vines over the opening in the rocks," she explained, pointing to the entrance. She continued once Ethan nodded. "There's a cove up there that I like to hide out in when I need some alone time, I guess. So, yeah, just follow my lead." She didn't really wait for Ethan to react this time, she just turned her head and started climbing while cursing her flushed cheeks. Ethan didn't miss a beat, mimicking her climb quite easily behind her. She pulled herself up and pushed the vines out of the way so Ethan could see where he was going. He walked carefully towards the center of the cove, slowly taking in the space around him. Zephyr stood by the entrance, playing with some of the hanging vines. He seemed a little shocked or awed by the small space, which Zephyr could relate to. She had a similar reaction when she first discovered it, and it had been her most well-kept secret ever since. After a while she felt too awkward silently watching him, so she sort of involuntarily started rambling whatever came to mind. I found this cove a couple years ago when I was exploring the island. It's always so quiet over here, further away from the village. No one really comes over here anyway since it's a little further from the village. And it's set back enough that I haven't seen scouts on the few times they've patrolled the perimeter of the island. If he was listening, he didn't indicate it in any way. But she kept talking anyway, if nothing more than to fill the silence. Not even Nuff knows about it. And if he's ever found it, he's never told me. I haven't caught him here either. So it's kind of like my own little corner of Newburgh. And I've always liked that this opening here, she gestured to the hanging vines, well aware that Ethan wasn't paying any attention to her, looks out towards the west. Dad always told me that's roughly the direction of the hidden world, where the dragons had gone to. She shrugged. Kinda makes me feel like I'm watching over them too, you know. To her surprise, Ethan silently nodded as he watched the waterfall. Zephyr bit her lip, a little embarrassed now. I've never really shown this place to anybody before. It's always been the place I go when I need to get away from everybody. If I'm sad or angry or upset or whatever. But I thought that, you know. Maybe you could use a place like that too. She turned to examine the vines with unnecessary intensity. So, you know. Feel free to come and go as you please, now that you know where it is. There's I have a blanket over there by that big rock. It can get pretty cold sometimes, so that's helpful, she shrugged again. Gods, Zephyr, it's like you've never spoken to another human before, get over yourself. What's mine is yours while you're here. I trust you. Her cheeks burned with a furious heat. Like, you know, enough to share this kind of stuff with you. She very much wanted to be away from here now. I have to go see my dad before he starts the council meeting tonight. You can stay here as long as you want. Do you think you can find your way back to the village? He nodded, still not directly facing her. Or really reacting much in any other way than the occasional nods. Which Zephyr wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Cool, yeah, so, yeah, just head in the direction the waterfall faces and you'll find the village. They'll want to see you at the meeting, so just make sure you're back by sundown. Ah. Do you remember how to find the Great Hall? Another silent nod. Good, cool, good, So. Yeah. She didn't really have anything else to say after that, so she awkwardly turned to the vines and started moving them out of the way to start climbing down. Zephyr. She nearly slipped on the wet rocks between the shock of hearing her name, hearing his voice for the first time since they got here, and turning back around to face him suddenly. Yeah. He was slightly turned like he wanted to look at her, but couldn't quite bring himself to fully face her. Thank you, he whispered, quiet enough that she almost couldn't hear it under the rushing waterfall. Zephyr nodded, mostly to herself. You're welcome. He took a breath, paused, and then added. Have you seen Orboda? Zephyr had to think back to the last time she saw the beautiful falcon. Her stomach dropped when she realized she hadn't lately. Oh, no, I haven't. Not since she brought me your last letter. That was about a week ago, she quietly admitted. Her heart broke when she watched his face fall. He nodded, but his body seemed even weaker than before with the weight of the news. She swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. She's okay, Ethan. She'll find her way back. Maybe she's just looking for you. That's what scares me, he choked. Zephyr turned away from him, afraid that he would see the tears welling in her eyes. She'll be fine, Ethan, she quietly repeated. She'll find her way back. He nodded once, but he didn't seem reassured. Zephyr decided she should leave before she made things worse. I'll see you at council, okay? Sundown, don't forget. He half nodded back. Zephyr slowly saw herself out, deciding it best to leave him be for a bit. Despite the fact that all she really wanted to do was wrap her arms around him, let him curl into her lap and cry, or let him punch some rocks and be there to wrap his hands when he was done, or give him someone to scream and round his frustrations out to, or whatever else he might need right now. But she just didn't know how to do that. So she quietly climbed down the rock face, wrapped her furs back around her shoulders, replaced the clasp, and walked back to the village with her head held high in feigned confidence. Because that was all she really knew what to do. And so she did her best to do what she needed to do, checking on the outcasts and the wing maidens and new Burkians, easing over any tensions while her father and the returning crew rested a bit from the long trip, trying to reassert her role despite the fact that her father was present again because he was resting. For God's sake, people, let the man rest, I'm still taking care of chiefly duties right now. Until the sun was all but completely set and she found her way back into the Great Hall, back to the meeting room where council was always held, noticing that she didn't see Ethan in the hall and hoping that meant someone already showed him to the council room. And then telling herself not to panic or cry or overtly react in any other way when he wasn't in there either. Everyone turned to look at her, seemingly the last to arrive. And everyone else seemed to have the same concern as her when they didn't see Ethan enter with her. Do you know where he is? Hiccup asked hopefully. Zephyr sighed. Yeah, probably. I was hoping he'd make it here on his own, though. Astrid turned to the group with heavy sympathy in her eyes. She has a point. There's no use forcing him to come. If he doesn't do it on his own, he won't be of any use to us. He's got to tell us all what happened eventually, those not loud said, though it was obvious he didn't like saying it. We can't protect anyone on this island properly until he does. Hiccup met Zephyr's eyes, seeming to search for something, though she wasn't sure what he was looking for. Eventually he sighed. You're right, Snot, but so is Astrid. I don't know what he went through, what any of them went through, but it's obviously bad enough that he's completely shut down. He's got to find his way back on his own or he'll never recover properly. He laughed humorlessly. Trust me. I would know. Everyone involuntarily bowed their heads a little. After a moment, Rough Nut asked, he really didn't give you any idea what happened? Hiccup, Tough Nut, Eret, and Fishlegs all shared a look before shaking their heads. The first day we got there he seemed like he was hanging on by a thread. I took him to my quarters below deck to give him a minute to breathe and he had a bit of an outburst. Hiccup strained to say the words. I'd be shocked if he's said more than 10 words since then. Until he saw Zephyr, at least. Do you think it was just too much for him, taking a step back? Feeling like he had to tell you what happened? Valka asked. Hiccup thought for a moment, obviously trying to think objectively and not with a guilty conscience. Zephyr saw a flash of his empty, emotionless eyes in her mind and shivered. No, she answered for him, shaking her head. No, that's not it. It wasn't that he lost control. She couldn't lift her eyes from the ground ahead of her. He didn't lose control. He was just